All right, so here I am on another phone edition of the Gwadzilla Podcast, and normally I'm interviewing bicycle messengers for this oral history project, but here I've got an interesting opportunity to speak with someone who currently owns a DC messenger company, and so I have on the line Jeff from Metro Delivery, and hey Jeff, how are you?
Hey, Joel, doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and so, we've spoken briefly, so I have a little background, and I'm interested, and I didn't want to talk too much and because I want to get it all on tape. But so, let's just jump right in. So Metro, it's a current company?
It is indeed. Still alive and well.
Okay, and then before we get into the history, do you currently employ any bicycle messengers?
We do. We still have some of our old faithful and long-tenured bike messengers on the team.
That's interesting. So maybe you could throw some of those names out and how long they've been with you.
Bruce Barron, probably 40 years, something like that, close to that. Let me see. We have Reese. Tom Reese, he's been with me, I would imagine, probably about that same time, 35 to 40 years.
Now, is he still on the bike? Because I know Bruce is in the car.
Bruce did switch over to the car after a while, but he was one of our long-term bike messengers. Him and probably our most infamous bike messenger that everybody knows on the street would be Kingfish, who unfortunately passed away just a handful of years ago. But He'd retired down to Brazil where he loved it. So everybody in the bike messenger industry knows Kingfish.
Yeah, he was a poet, and he let you know it. Yeah, so, okay, let's go. So, Jeff, let's back it up real quick. So we know that Metro Delivery was founded in 1967, which is a little bit before my time, and you came to own Metro Courier in 1990. Like, can you give us an idea? Were you a messenger? How did you decide that you were going to buy this pre-existing company?
So I joined Metro Delivery in 90 and then ended up buying the company in 95. And it was more situational. The owner was ready to retire. He was implementing his exit strategy. I was vice president of the company at that time, working in sales, and saw the opportunity and talked to him. I had sat in every seat of the industry, so I knew how all the different positions worked, which was my primary qualification for owning the company. And we worked out an arrangement where I could buy the company from him.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so, a lot of this is a oral history project on bike messengers, and a lot of people, when they think of messengers, they think only bicycle. But you and I know different, and Metro was a unique company because they had a history where they owned a fleet of motorcycles. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, we had a really awesome fleet of BMW motorcycles. These were the big yellow bikes that just rumbled the street. Like if you think of the park police bikes, those type. And we had about 27 of those. And then we had about a dozen vans. At that time, we were operating out of Adams Morgan, where we had a 15,000 square foot facility with I think about 5-bay garage and 2 full-time mechanics keeping the fleet running. And so it was a very unique time because we were the very first courier company in Washington, and so all of the couriers were all employees, and so they all, they had their own motorcycles. Well, they were company motorcycles, but they had theirs assigned to them, and it was just a really cool, fun time.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about that, and I often joke about the bike messenger with the dispatcher, delivery person relationship, but my goodness, like, can we get like a kind of like a movie like the TV show Taxi about Metro Delivery? Because we know some stuff went down there, and the people that you employed, it was a colorful place. But even like the notion of the 27 motorcycles, I mean, it's unimaginable in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And in today's world, it just wouldn't work with the insurances and having an independent contractor as they've become now on a big old motorcycle like that running through town. I don't think anybody could afford to pay the insurance on it.
Yeah, and so those were BMW R75/5s, if I remember correctly, and all of them had a custom paint job where the gas tanks were yellow.
Yep, they were all big yellow bikes. They had back then it was Metro Messenger across the front of them with the phone number, which was pretty cool having a big fleet of those around.
Yeah, no, very cool.
And bicycle messengers as well that complemented them.
So do you remember back in the day, because I've heard people talk about, there's a legend, they called him Featherhead, Jim Rapp.
Jim Rapp.
Did he work for Metro?
I knew of him.
What's that?
He did not. But I knew of Jim Rapp. Yeah, I knew who he was, but he did not work for us. If he did, it was before my time. So there was a couple of decades there before I came in 90 that they were operating.
Yeah, Jim Rapp, he was an entrepreneur of sorts. And he's best known for a number of things. And it was, selling weed, riding rollerblades, and cashing checks. And that was a pre-digital age. A lot of messengers might have, they might have lied about their social security number and they just got a check and they just cashed it. And a lot of people didn't have, they were paycheck to paycheck. They didn't have bank accounts, and they would either cash their check at the liquor store, or they'd go to Jim Rapp, who ran the same business but gave a better rate than the liquor store. But I heard that he did that out of the garages at Metro. I'm not positive, but that, like you said, that could have been a pre-1990 experience. I don't know when he had his episode with his housemate calling the vice president's house, but that was a pretty crazy time back then in the 80s, in the 90s, leading into the 90s as well. But it's very possible that Jim was operating out of the garage there at that point. He definitely had the entrepreneurial spirit and very innovative and creative in ways to make money. So that would not surprise me at all. At your let's say messenger peak, how many bicycle messenger, car messengers? What's a breakdown? You remember like the demographic of the numbers of the different groups?
Yeah, I think probably at our I'm thinking we probably had somewhere upwards of about 40 or so bike messengers. And I think about 35 car drivers, maybe a few more. But we would hire bike messengers. They would fluctuate somewhere around 40 and maybe high as 50. And then the car messengers usually was right around that 30, 35 mark. And then we had probably a half a dozen, 6 or 7 mopeds. We tried to get as many mopeds as possible back then after we lost the motorcycles, because their range was a little different, right? They can go a little bit further than the bikes up Wisconsin, up onto the cathedral and things like that, a lot easier than having some of the guys pedal up those hills. And so they would fill in the gaps where the car drivers could stay on in the suburbs more so.
Yeah, there was during that, there was a moment where, now we have the advent of the e-bike, but there was a moment where the moped had its place. And in fact, before there was Uber, before there was DoorDash, there was a la carte express. And similar to Metro Courier, the company owned the vehicles. And so there were, maybe, I don't even know, a dozen, maybe 20 delivery people. And they all rode these mopeds around with a rack with a large plastic tub that carried the food.
On the back. Yeah, but the food. A la carte was actually in the building right next to us over on Champlain Street in Adams Morgan for years. And they were the first Uber Eats, of the area.
That's funny that, the parallels and that they were next to each other. So they were on Champlain Street. So your warehouse space, did that become the city bikes? Did some of that, they had a large warehouse where their mechanics did repairs down the hill there. Or
I know City Bikes was up on top. I'm not sure where they did the repairs.
They were mid-block. Where was the warehouse? Like, I'm trying to think. Like, is it the space?
At the bottom of the hill down there, the Calorama and Champlain. So right down at the bottom, we had a big parking lot, fenced-in parking lot, and then the building. And like I said, we had, I think we had probably 4 or 5 days, I want to say, for the mechanics to work out of. They had a big mechanic shop within that space.
What an amazing operation, and it's just a weird evolution. So there you are. You worked there for several years. You bought it, and then then came the 2000s. Like, maybe we can speak from a business perspective. Like what happened to you as the analog world turned to digital?
Well, that was a transitional time for all businesses, because as couriers back then was primarily document delivery. We delivered paper. And in that digital world, that all became somewhat, not completely obsolete, but white paper became a bad word, right? We were encouraged not to print. And PDF and broadband became our biggest adversary. So now, instead of these law firms sending big documents over, they would literally PDF them and ship, zap them over to the other people, where they told them don't even print them, just keep them on, in the cloud or on your computer at that point. And so in that period, we started focusing more on either the agencies that we were dealing with that still had original filings. But during that whole period of time, a lot of the government agencies started moving to electronic filings also. And so things like House and Senate docs that we used to have to pick up, by the dozens on a daily basis, all became digital. I watched so many industries be affected by the digital age. One of our biggest client bases was travel agents. Everybody had to have a ticket. You had to have a boarding pass to get on a plane. And so we were delivering tickets for probably over 50 travel agents. And when the e-ticket came along, well, it took probably about 11% of our business away, but it put an entire industry out of business. Travel agents used to be like dry cleaners. There was one on every block, if you remember, right?
Yes.
Travel agents were everywhere. And now there's maybe a handful, and they probably just specialize in, safaris and very specialized travel. So the digital age really came and put a big dent into the courier world and what it was that we delivered. So now we had to look for sometimes more things like tangibles. So now we're delivering, jewels for the tiny jewel box and furs for Saks Fifth Avenue and things like that. Got into more of the things that could not be sent electronically. And that led us into, past the 2000s to where it became like furniture delivery and things like that. So now Metro, I've branched off and I started a Metro Delivery Group, and we do full service moving and storage, which derived from the courier world when we first started delivering just a chair for the furniture reps here or there. And then it just became scalable for me. If you can deliver one chair, you can deliver 10, you can deliver 100. And the same thing with the other office furniture. So that's how I got into now the moving business. So we have 2 divisions of Metro Delivery now. Still the courier, same day service as they call it now, and then the moving and storage.
Respect to you, Jeff, for being able to evolve. I'm not sure what has happened to other people, forced into retirement. But maybe let's go back and maybe you could talk a little about the de-evolution and the downsizing of the company, changing of locations, hiring less people. Yep.
So that all came to pass probably in that, after that whole Y2K fiasco that really affected no one, into those 2000s, first came the fax, right, with the slimy fax paper. And after that came email. And then, like I said, broadband and PDFs really kind of put a stamp on our business. Another large clientele of ours was banking. And we used to have to pick up the deposits from all of their clients and deliver the checks back to the bank. Well, they came up with these cool little scanners. It's like a little post office machine. You scan your checks through there, and no longer do you have to take your checks to the bank. So we had probably at one point maybe 10 people doing bank routes all day long, and that whole business went away. So again, another big chunk of business taken away from us. And so, I was pretty proactive and on the leading edge, and I would talk to my clients, and I heard about these scanners coming out probably 15 months before they came out, and I realized it was the real deal and what was going to happen over the next 2 or 3 years, which it did. And so you have to pivot. You have to think, I'm going to lose another 12 or 50% of my business or whatever banking made up. And so that's where we really started pivoting. And it changed because you did not need as many bike messengers anymore. We went from, at one point, DC had over 400 courier companies, which just astounds me. You could stand on any block corner and at any given time probably see a half a dozen bike messengers just on any corner in DC. That's how many there were. And as today goes by, you can stand down there for 10 minutes and not even see a bike messenger drive by or ride by. So there was a bit of decommissioning of a lot of those courier companies, and a lot of those courier companies were very small, right? They could be you and me in a truck and in a moped, and we're a courier company. We have one nice client, so that made up those 400. But there was still probably 30 or 40 viable, decent-sized courier companies. And a lot of them went by the wayside also, and they found other things to do. Some just got into medical routes, right? That's all they did. Or, they got on a GSA schedule, and now they're just doing some gov stuff. So, but a lot of those have disappeared also, and those owners have stepped back and they've retired, and there's been no one to take their place. And so they've pretty much either folded up or they've sold and merged with other businesses.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things is, forced into retirement. You luckily morphed into something else, and I was thinking after we agreed, that we would have this interview, I was like, oh, I need to call Kevin from Apple,
Yeah.
and because it is an interesting story, and so and then do you still have offices downtown or?
So we moved our offices out of town. So I outsourced my management system, which back then there was no such thing. So I kind of helped create the very first model for what now is like an outsourced solution, which some people are doing that. I guess thinking at first also, one of the cool things is that before I was with Metro, I was with another courier company, and I was one of the very first people to set up an in-house messenger system for large clients. And so this was at Covington and Burling. We did a lot of law firms, and I set up like my own dispatcher down there. I went down there for about 6 or 8 months, worked out of the basement of Covington. I had 6 bike messengers and 1 car messenger and my own radio system, and we only did Covington deliveries, and they were doing like 120 deliveries a day. It was insane. And so that became the first in-house messenger, where you're in-house at a client's offices because they're a large volume client. And then
what year was that?
That would have probably been mid-'80s, probably around 85 or so. And then we set up a handful of those clients to where they had in-house. And then all the big law firms that we were servicing at this company I was with, wanted to have in-house now because it was just much more responsive, right? They had their own messengers. They could send things. They didn't have to get put in queue. And so we set up a bunch of those. And then that's when the computer systems came out, because back when I was starting with Metro, even in 90, we were all on handwritten tickets with a carbon copy that went to dispatch. So we would write out, we were doing about 1,500 deliveries a day. We would handwrite all the tickets, peel off the back, yellow copy, and that's what went into dispatch, and the white got filed for billing. So now came the computer system where we can now enter them in, and then came the remote computers where we can put the computer into the client's office and they can enter their own deliveries. And then we would just dispatch from there. So then my job came to be going and training all of our clients, and we had probably 30 or 40 of them at that point that had in-house systems or these remote computers, training them how to use the computer system and type in their own deliveries. So the industry was really evolving also with the digital age, but in a different way. It was taking away some of the work, but there was a great evolution that happened with the electronics that were available and the internet at that point for clients now to be able to interface directly in and order there's courier service. And it did one thing very well. It took out one person in the equation and therefore eliminated some of those mistakes, because you play the game where you whisper into somebody's ear and down the line it's completely changed, right? So when the lawyer tells the mailroom person what they want, and they call us and we give it to the customer service who puts it in the system that gives it to the dispatcher, that gives it to the courier, maybe a number got transposed, right? Or something like that. And so this eliminated at least the communication between the client and our office. Whatever went to dispatch came directly from the client. And then we got to the point to where with the pagers we were using and some of the Nextels at that point, we could literally take the information that the client put into the computer and it went directly to the courier. So we eliminated a lot of that crossover kind of those mistakes that could happen as you're transitioning or translating from one person to another. So there was a lot of good that came from also and refinement of process from the digital age. But all in all, it did take away business, the kind of the market from the delivery piece.
So you mentioned a law firm, Covington and Burling, as being your first, and like for me, there's a quick ding, like 1201 Penn, So
1201 Penn.
Yeah, so because it was the dispatcher might have some weird like nickname for it, and it was like going to a friend's house. You wouldn't even have to know the address. You could just ride there intuitively. Yeah. But maybe you could name a few of the other law firms, and maybe you could name some of the people you placed there, because a lot of the people that became in-house had been commissioned, and then a lot of the people who became dispatchers were also previous messengers, and some of these were like legends. Like there's one guy in maybe 1333 New Hampshire named Hightower.
Hightower, yeah.
Is that someone you know?
I know Hightower.
So maybe, so what, did he work for you?
He did at one point.
Now, did he work as a messenger or as a dispatcher?
As a messenger. Yeah. And it's so funny because all the messengers had their street names, right? Their nickname. So we had Chicken Wing, Satan, The Mate, Kingfish, who I've mentioned, right? And so it's pretty neat because most of the people knew the couriers from their nickname or their driver number, not from their actual name. And so it's so funny. But James Kearns was one of the in-house guys. Let's see, Kelvin Owen, called him Jay. We called him, he was the fastest guy we had. We called him D Owen. But they had a name for him also, like the Flash. Like, if you had a late filing to the Hill, he could get from downtown to the Hill in 4 minutes on a bike, right? Or 6 minutes from, Midtown to the Hill on a bicycle. He was just absolutely amazing. And so we had him. There was Track was another one of the guys. Trying to think of some of the other guys that have really kind of made a mark in the courier industry. But those were a few names that come to mind.
Yeah, and I know some of those names, And James Kearns is an interesting character because in that era, he teamed up with a guy named Stevie Gibson. And those guys, they had an art magazine called Mobile City where bicycle messengers would contribute their photographs, their stories, their poetries, maybe their songs. And it's just an amazing thing. It's an amazing time. This very unique, very urban, community, subculture, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, Steve Gibson worked for us also. 12 was his number. Dave McComb, 14, who passed away considerable time ago, probably I think around 91. He was another one that a lot of people knew and respected. Dave McComb. He was such a great guy and such a good messenger. His abilities to manage so much stuff. You could literally throw 5 or 6 deliveries at him at once and he'd just call you 10-8, right? And so And for those who aren't familiar with the industry, we use the same 10 codes that the police use on a lot of things, right? So 10-7, you've picked up, 10-8, you've dropped, 10-30, you're all clear, no more runs, that kind of thing. So it was its own language, and the bicycle messengers, like you said, that community was very tribal, right? And there was a lot of love and respect amongst the messengers. And we got to the point at Metro to where we only wanted the top messengers. We had those guys, the Bruces, the Kelvins, the Steve Smiths, or Gibson. And a lot of the bike messengers were racers also. So they raced bikes. So we would host these races also. They would do their own races. Some of them were like the, what do you call it, where they're on like a scavenger hunt, right?
Yeah, the Alley Cat.
The Alley Cat races. And those were super cool. And so we got to the point to where we literally had the elite, the best of the best bike messengers. And everybody wanted to work for us because of just the caliber, but also we paid more than anybody else. If you recall, what was the average people were paying back then commission-wise for the bike messengers?
I mean, it's hard to say because it's per run and it's per company. And, I think that, people's goal would be to make $100 a day.
Yeah, but as far as their commission goes, so they're going to get a percentage of the base price. So most of the industry was paying about 50% to the courier. So if they charged $8 for a delivery, the courier got 4, the company got 4. And then they'd try and get up to, 53, 55%. 60% was like the top of the line anybody ever heard of. We were paying some of our veterans 65%. We would start our people at 50. I had a plan in place to where they could, in a very short tenure, they didn't have to be there, 3 years, 5 years before they would get to 55% or 60. You really just need to prove to me and the dispatcher that you were worth it, that you were, you had the ethics, you had, the abilities also. You get a lot of guys in there just talking, oh, I'm top dog, I know everything, right? And you put them on the street and you're like, pick up here, and they're like, where is that? And you're like, oh my goodness, State Department, and you have to give an address and go into the C Street entrance. It's like, okay, you don't know what you're talking. You come in here talking a good game, trying to get a high commission. We put you on the street, and very quickly you're going to know whether they know what's up or not, right? But like you said, a lot of these people, all you had to do is say, pick up a Williamson Conley and go on to, the Federal Register. And that's it. And so everybody kind of knew either the name of the building, the name of the firm, or where it was going, or pick up here, I got 3 going to, Federal Triangle or to the press, area or building. So I absolutely love that time and that time period and who we were. At that point, if you wanted to come work for Metro as a bike messenger, you had to be sponsored by one of our existing bike messengers. I mean, somebody vouched for you. You had to go get a King or James Kern to say, I know this guy's good, I vouch for him, and therefore you can fill out an app and maybe come work for us. If we didn't know you, if one of our guys didn't know you and wouldn't vouch for you, you didn't work there. It was that simple. And that's how we kept the level of certitude and the service that we offered our clients, because we were all about being the premier company offering the absolute best service. And the way to do that is get rid of all the wild cards out there. So there was a lot of guys out of there that were, they were drinking out of the bags at Farragut Park at noon, and that's not the guy that you want to send into Covington, right? At 2:00 for a filing. So we had to kind of manage that, and it's a real delicate balance of how many couriers you need versus how much work, because once you get off balance, you got couriers sitting around not making money on a big list. And if you go the other way, now you've got so much work that you can't get it done on time. And so you had to find out, how are we going to get the couriers and keep them here every day at work? And that's where we mentioned previously about guarantees. They started offering guarantees to the couriers to just make sure they would show up every day. And so that was something that we probably started. I know I'd come up with that idea at Metro, and I don't know if it was anywhere else, but I know some of the other companies started doing guarantees also. And it helped in some ways, but also I don't know if it hurt, but it kind of diminished the ability for other people to make money too, like they could have if it was just straight on demand.
Yeah, so you've covered a lot of things, and that's all very interesting. Jeff, you're telling a great story, and I'm really appreciating it. But yeah, it's interesting because yes, you're saying that Metro had this notion of respect for the worker because a company could, in fact, they could just overhire. They could hire anyone who came in the door, and then all of a sudden, there's not enough pie for everyone to get a slice. And so, various companies had a reputation, but like you're saying, there was a quality and a caliber of variance, and there were messengers who, let's say, on payday, they get their check. And, I spoke about the check cashing, and they're going to get their check cash, and they're going to go, start their weekend. And so I remember some companies would be like, oh, checks aren't in, to try and get people to work. But people like a dog waiting for a treat. These guys are like, I'm not doing work. I'm waiting for my check. And it's like but today is a work day anyway. And so in those cases, because a company, if you have a few guys like that, you need a few more guys like that, or else you're not going to have any workers.
Yeah. And that's happened to so many companies, even to ourselves at first, where now we've got work, and the worst thing is to say no to a client, right? You're not only leaving money on the table, you're straining that relationship. And what would happen then is all of those clients, now they have 2 and 3 and 4 backups, right? Because that courier company told them no, so they just go to the next number, and they go to the next number. You were mentioning some of the law firms we worked with back then. One was DLA Piper, right? It used to be Piper Marbury. And I remember they were just up the street from us when we'd moved to 19th Street. And they were just a couple buildings up from us. So I walked in there, and I'm trying to get their business. And finally I come in, and I'm in 4th place, right? So they have 4 different courier companies, and I'm the last one that they call. And we, within, I don't know how long it was, but it wasn't very long, maybe 6 months, moved up to the number 1. And it's because we always said yes. And no matter what they asked and how ridiculous or difficult or challenging it was, we found a way to get it done. And it helped us become that solutions-based company, figuring out what do we need to do in order to accommodate whatever the request is. And so it's just aligning their expectations with our abilities, or actually the other way around, right? Making sure that we were capable of doing whatever it was they expected of us. And that turned into a very, very good relationship. And actually, that's where I got the idea for outsourcing my operations, because back then, if you remember, they had these facilities management teams that would run these law firm mailrooms. Well, I thought the whole time when I'm in Piper talking to the mailroom that those guys worked for Piper. They did not. They worked for, I think it was Xerox or Pitney Bowes, actually. So these types of companies would staff the mail rooms, whether they were law firms or whether they were at the university or hospitals. And so they were facilities management companies. And I had no idea about that until I walked in, and finally one of the guys says, no, I don't work for Piper. We work for Pitney Bowes. I'm like, what do you mean? And he explained the whole model. And first of all, then that became a great source for me, because then I went to Pitney Bowes and I started picking up business from all of their in-house facilities management clients. But it also gave me the idea, because at that point, I'm an ops guy. I started as a messenger. When I finally lost my license, right, suspended, I went into the office. I answered phones for years. And then I got bored of that, and I was like, I want to learn to dispatch. Then I was a dispatcher for many, many years. And then I went into the bookkeeping department and accounting, and then eventually up to the sales. I told you about it, and kind of worked my way through. So I held all the positions. But in that period of time, being the ops guy, when I finally bought the company, I wanted to grow the company. I wanted to go out and do sales, but I kept getting sucked back into operations, right? It's like, oh, we're short on couriers. I'm on the road. Or my dispatcher's off. I'm back in the dispatching. And so I thought to myself, I was like, I would love to hire somebody like Pitney Bowes to run my operation so I can go out and sell. But there's no possible way to do that, because dispatchers back then were like air traffic controllers, right? If you don't know what you're doing, planes are going to crash and burn. There was no GPS. Everybody had a map. And the bike messengers definitely did not have time to look at maps. They had to just know the city and know where all the buildings were. And So everything happened it was all knowledge based. There was no resources. You couldn't just pick up your phone and Google, where's FTC? And how do I get there? You just had to know how to get there. And the same thing with dispatchers. I'm like, there's no way I can outsource to like these facility management people because they don't know how to dispatch. They're great at just answering phones like a temp, but they couldn't even be a customer service rep. Because somebody would say, pick up at 600 Connecticut Avenue, and they would type it in the computer and try and dispatch it. And then the courier would go, dude, there is no 600 Connecticut Avenue. It starts at 800, right? What do you mean? 1600? 16, right? So those types of problems. So I knew that wasn't going to work. But I wanted to be able to do that. I wanted to outsource my operations so that I can focus on sales and growing the business. So I came up with the idea, the only way this is going to work is for another courier company to run my operations. But now you're talking about getting in bed with your competitor, right? So how's that going to work? So I mentioned a while back that I was the guy that was in charge of training all of our clients on the computers how to enter their deliveries into the software. Well, the software system that we were using was developed and designed by another courier company, Mike Pillar from Action Courier. And so I had a relationship with him because I bought the software from him. And I knew he was servicing it, so I knew that he had access. He could get in and see it, right, if he needed to. So there was a level of trust that was already there. This was long before NDAs came out. It was a handshake and trust. And so I thought, maybe I could have Mike do this. So I reached out to Mike, and I told him my idea. Nobody had ever done this, so there was no model to choose from. And not only did he say no, he said, hell no. And then he said, how about this? I'll buy your company. I'm like, no, I don't want to sell my company. I just want somebody to run the day-to-day operations. And so I started throwing numbers around and figuring, he goes, well, how would I get paid for this? And how do we have checks and balances? Because now we each know each other's clients and our careers. But we made it all work. And we ended up setting up this first outsource model to where I've outsourced, and Mike still to this day runs and operates our courier service. And I've seen quite a few other couriers do that as well. I think you mentioned Kevin over at Apple. I think Washington Express is managing him, and maybe some other ones as well. And so we created this model for that, which really allowed me to go out and focus on, my clients, which was really instrumental in the growth and diversity. As I mentioned before, being able to go out and pivot and change as the times change and say, okay, courier service is going to be capped out as to what we're able to deliver now. We got to find another source or another stream of income. And that's how we got into moving.
I worked as a mover. I worked for Gulliver's Movers. And it's interesting. I worked for them shortly after being a bike messenger in some respects because of a quick hourly with freedom was better than the question mark, like too many $33 days as a messenger, and so it was like, I could go in and work as a mover, and maybe I did a 4-hour move and had the rest of the day to myself, and maybe if I got a tip, it was more dependable,
Yeah.
But it also it gave me the freedom to I would go snowboarding for weeks at a time in Colorado, and I'd leave and then come back, or I traveled to Southeast Asia. I did a bunch of things. I rode my motorcycle cross country, and it was just you just get back and you would just, instead of like putting out a resume, it's like just go back downtown and go to the courier company or the moving company and get hired immediately and start getting a check.
Yep.
So, okay,
the bike messengers worked hard for that money. They really did. I mean, they worked through all the elements, and, it was adapt, adjust, and overcome just to meet the deadlines. And to get paid, $3 on a delivery or something like that, you got to do a lot of $3 deliveries to get to that for 1,000.
Yeah, it's true. They did work hard, and and they dealt with the heat and they dealt with the cold. And that's some of the bond, it's the trenches, and it's a metaphor because it is not going to war, but it's a metaphor of the shared experience and the unity, and there's a big us versus them, it's the bicyclist versus a car, and then they get into the elevator and it's us versus them. And, it's the suits versus, whatever this
industry.
Yeah. And so you tried to hire I'm not saying Eric Barnes, Chicken Wing. I don't know anything about his reputation, but there's still, even like the dependable guys are a little wild, even if they're not wild cards. Like, can you remember any incidences where maybe a conflict with a receptionist or a security guard, or banned from the building? I mean, I'll tell you, I was banned from the Senate document room. I mean, it wasn't hard to get banned as a courier.
No, it wasn't, and that was probably more frequent than we liked. But again, you have to realize the environment that we were working in. Everything was urgent, right? Everything was like time-based. And, you can imagine, like, when you're late for something and you're sitting at a light now, how stressed you get just sitting there for that 30 seconds waiting for that light to change. These guys are being pushed and pushed and pushed to make all these deadlines, almost getting hit by the cab or the bus, and then finally getting in there, and now you got to deal with the security person. And they're on their last nerve, right? And the last bit of any kind of professionalism they have sometimes. And so we would get those calls, and we would get those notices, this courier is banned from this building, because the security guards love to flex, and the only ones they could flex on were the couriers, because the FedEx guys have to have access, right? The people that work there, they couldn't flex on any of the tenants, right, or any of their guests. The only people they could flex on would be the couriers. And so they love to push the couriers' buttons. Sign in. I can't read it. Sign it again. It's like, dude, just let me go, right? I got to get this up there. And so I would definitely get those calls that, hey, your courier was, not the nicest coming through here. I think one of the funniest ones, even though it was horrible, was down at, 555 13th. What was the big firm that was in there? Hogan Hartson, I think. And so in that building, it's a great big giant atrium. You go in there, and I actually believe it was the mate maybe that did this. He went in there, and the security guy told him to sign the paper, and he was trying to walk by him without signing in or something like that. And he went and got him, and he drug him back to the desk. He goes, you need to, sign this paper before you can go in, sign in. And he picked up the paper. He blew his nose in it, wadded it up, and threw it at him and walked on. And I was like, oh, my goodness, are you kidding me? So, I think the mate got banned from that building.
Well, so I think
that's the kind of stuff that happens.
Yeah, so, so this industry existed for years. And so over time, things started to change. And I think that 555 13th was one of the first come in the back.
Yeah.
And so, like you were saying, here the messenger is, they're lowest on the totem pole, and then here it is, you can't even come in the front. And so it's a 2-tower building, and so if you have to go to the far tower, it would make more sense. It ends up backfiring because you have to walk through the whole lobby when you would have parked on the outside. So I had a Cannondale SM600. It's a mountain bike, and it had 26 front wheel and 24 in the back. So when they were putting a bike rack in there, and I'm going in, they asked to use my bike to measure it, and I didn't even say anything. And it was a dick move because it put the rack too close that people could really use it. But I was intentionally unhelpful because I was grumpy about the notion of the back of the bus type mentality of the messenger has to come in,
sure,
the loading dock by the trash can.
Yeah.
And if someone started in a later moment, their first day, they're entering by the loading dock by the trash can. But it wasn't always that way. And then, I'll touch on this and some of the decline. Just as there was the advent of the digital age, there became an alteration of security. There was a time in the 80s where all these buildings were open. You could walk into the Capitol and it was just a playground. You can go anywhere, any hallway, any corridor. Nobody is stopping you. Elevator could say senators only. You could go into Department of Justice, Chamber of Commerce. Well, no, Chamber of Commerce, you only enter in the basement, but Department of Commerce. And so you had this free range of these massive buildings. But then there were certain things. There was an anthrax scare, and then 9/11, and then security changed. And so maybe you can talk about what I've spoken about security, but also how the security changed the messenger industry for you.
Yeah, it was very funny because just last week, I think it was, or 2 weeks ago, I did a private tour with an executive group I'm part of the U.S. Capitol. And so it was really neat because we get to go into a lot of places that it's just not open to the public. And I was telling them, because we went, we came in through, I think it was the Longworth or maybe the Rayburn. We came in from the house side through the tunnels up there. And I told him, I said, last time I was roaming these halls, I was a courier. And you used to literally just be able to go through security and you're just roaming the halls, right? You're walking into whatever congressman or woman's or senator's office and just dropping the stuff right on the front desk. And you're going up to the judge's chambers, right? And we just had free roam, and we had back passes back then. So once you had a back pass, you can pretty much go anywhere.
Okay,
we're already clear.
So you had a BAC. So that was I used to call it the badass career pass, but it was the building access card.
I like that.
It was a government ID for non-government employees. And so, but like you're saying, you guys had it. Now, it was a rarity, and I also had that, but I also had it taken away by a Capitol Hill cop. But so talk about the BAC card. Was that part of the Metro delivery system that you had your guys game up and get that, or?
Yep. Yeah, we had that because it gave you access, and access is, to this day is still everything for whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And it gave you access, and it expedited things also. It was more efficient, more expedient, because you flash your back pass, you go straight in, right? And so therefore, you didn't have to stand in those security lines. You didn't have to go through the scrutiny. You didn't have to sign in and have a confrontation with that. You were already pre-screened. And so we had all of our messengers get the BAC pass because it just made life much easier all the way around. And it was even recognized in some of the other non-government buildings to where once they saw you had that, you can go in some of the other institutional type of buildings like World Bank and IMF and things like that.
Yeah, it's the subtleties, the changing of the times. I mean, it's I forget what the film is, and it's foolish for me to reference it, but Sean Connery is in this movie, and he was a criminal in one time, and then when he gets out of jail, he wants to rob a bank, and it's so funny because, there's like a camera in the corner, and it turns and looks at him, but now it's absolutely crazy. They've got even the Justice Department has this tube. I don't even know what it's scanning for. Like, it's like you're in this tube. Like, what is it looking at? And there was a time before, and not that you would have much business there. Maybe you'd pick up a press release from the press office, but again, on the daily or whatever it was, room 1214. But of course, that's probably a reduced fair run, but that evaporated when things went digital.
Yep. And after, like you said, the anthrax scare, that changed business for us in a couple different ways. One, there was a very positive thing that happened on the business side for us. Of course, it slowed down everything through security. Everything now had to be heavily scrutinized. All the mail had to be irradiated before it went into these big, we had World Bank was one of our big clients, right? IDB, big, even large firms, they would never deliver their mail until it was checked. And so now I was working with, I think it was Pitney Bowes and the IMF, and we had to come up with a process to irradiate their mail before it could be delivered there. And there was no model for this either, because something like this hadn't happened to this level. So what we ended up coming up with was we worked with I don't know if they're chemists or who they are, but the the team that would actually test the mail, and they set up this makeshift trailer. So it was like a tractor trailer and had the laboratory there. We ended up we had two trucks. We had a dirty truck and a clean truck, right? So we would go to the post office to Brentwood. We'd pick up the mail. We would take it out to this lab. They would test it. And that was the dirty truck because the mail was untested. Then we had a different truck, which was a clean truck. After the mail is tested, it goes into that truck, and then we deliver it to the World Bank or IMF or IDB or whoever those big clients were. So we had to create an entire process to have all of this mail checked, irradiated before it was delivered.
All right, Jeff, real quick, Jeff.
Go ahead.
One anthrax scare, change of policy, change of procedure. One shoe bomb, shoes off in the airport forever. And I think I had one more, but I lost it. Several hundred school shootings a year, nothing. There has not been another anthrax. Like all of these labs, never again was there. Oh, the next was going to be the Tylenol bottle. We have those stupid things like even on the ketchup bottle. One incident that never repeated.
Changing everything.
Yeah. Preventing. In the end, you could have put Lancelot Link out there with the super chimps or whatever in lab coats because there was, the process was scientific and thorough and well designed, but it happened once. It never happened again. And
it cost these organizations tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, we were charging so much money to do this work, right? We could charge one client, $2,200 a day to go do all this stuff, right? Because you're picking up, 11 of those great big, bins full of mail. So each one of those bins could have, 10 of those big bags full of mail in it. And we're just loading up the truck full of it. And we're picking them up for these large organizations and institutions and then having to check it. And then whatever the labs were charging them to actually do the real work, we were just the delivery piece of it. But even just creating that process, I remember being down at the IMF, sitting there with me, with the IMF guys, with the guys from Pitney Bowes and the lab guys, and going, how are we going to get this done so that there's checks and balances and it's pretty much foolproof. And the only exposure really is the driver who's picking up the dirty mail.
So, my kids went to DC public schools, and when my younger son was in middle school, on the 8th day of school, he gets caught for having a knife in his bag. Immediate suspension.
Wow.
And he had gone camping with me that summer, and the knife was in the bag from the camping trip, which means that he had 7 days where he entered that building with that knife in the bag. And there was a second knife in the bag. So they only found one knife. So they should have sent some anthrax on some fucking envelopes, and it would have gotten through. It's, metal detectors, magometers. I mean, humans are humans, and everything it could potentially slip through the cracks, And as I said, no one's ever tried that again. Maxwell Smart hasn't tried the shoe bomb since. It's an interesting thing. But it played to your advantage. It gave you another way to monetize. Another fee. Another way for you to evolve and to cash in.
Yeah, and so with everything, there's the rose and the thorn, and so unfortunately, there's been too many thorns for the industry that's just taken too much of the market share of what we used to deliver away, and it's now so digital that it's not something we'll ever recover from, to where they'll ever need that kind of conventional delivery again.
Yeah, but
and so we turn to tangibles.
So I'm looking at my record collection. So there was a record industry, and musicians were dependent on making money off selling records. There's no record industry anymore. And it's actually because of the same thing. It's because of the digital age and streaming. We get information a different way, and it's tough. Just think of all the record executives who, it's like, now what do we do? And yeah, they find their ways and they get their money, and you clearly have been able to also alter your understanding. The dinosaurs die, and those that evolve.
Yep. We used to. One thing I liked about the bike messengers, so many of them are musicians also. And I play music. I still play music. I still play in a band. And we would have these parties. And sometimes they would just, I remember one we did, they were doing an alley cat race, and it ended up back at the shop. And we had a big party for all the bike messengers there. And we had a band, and it was just kind of freestyle. If you were a musician, just come up and grab the drums or guitar or whatever you're playing. And what a great time. And I love the fact that so many of the guys are musicians that are bike messengers also. The fact that they race, because I used to race also. I race jet skis. So I like, so dirt bikes, jet skis, snowboards. I think you mentioned you snowboard. I love all that stuff. Any chance we get to go fast and put a helmet on, I feel like I'm going to be doing something fun. And but I like the musician piece of that. So that resonates with me when you talk about the record industry, because it's completely changed. And again, for the better, for access, for everybody to be able to do it. They can record a record, in their home if they want to, and actually release it and never have to sign a contract with anybody.
So can you remember any of the names of any of the musicians? Because I remember, so there's a band, Government Issue. So I'm very hyped on, that 1981 DC hardcore thing on until, 87. That would be, my, teen into college years. So DC had a local scene that really affected me. And Government Issue, I remember John Stabb was a walking courier. But I'm trying to think of who else, can you think of any musicians?
So D Owen was a guitar player, worked for us. And it's funny because I used to bring a different guitar for him every week. I had a lot of guitars I collected over the years, just finding them here and there, whatever. So I'd be like, hey, try this one out. And I'd bring a guitar to him, and he'd try it out for the week. And then I'd grab that one back and bring him, hey, check this one out. And so D was a pretty good guitar player. I always liked that. Jeff Easthope was one of our dispatchers. He was a badass drummer. He actually moved away, and he's back in the area somewhere up in I think Bethesda area, and he's in a Police tribute band playing drums. And Stuart Copeland is a badass drummer for Police, so you got to be a good drummer to play that stuff.
Oh, no doubt.
So that was Jeff Easthope. Yep. So check him out. There was another guy named Jeff who played drums. He actually, I can't remember his last name, but he actually went to Japan for a couple years, learned to speak Japanese, came back and worked with us again, and he was a drummer. So I can't think of anybody else offhand, but there's a couple of them
Did you ever cross paths with Jay Moglia?
Man, that name sounds familiar.
So Jay Moglia was in a band, Crippled Pilgrims, and so he was sort of it's, anything that's not straight up rock kind of falls under the punk moniker. And he was in this band, Crippled Pilgrims, but he was a very talented guitar player. He was also a writer, but he was also a high-level racer. And then he was just so ambitious, he also started a bicycle racers training camp at Lost River, West Virginia. And tragically, he died and had a heart attack on a training ride. But it's these individuals. And clearly, you fit right into this group of these dynamic individuals who have their hands in the mix of many things. And I think there was a point when the messengers were just, I think the city as a whole was very colorful. I think people, group houses. You could live in Washington, D.C. off less money. You didn't have to be a doctor, a lawyer, or working at a not-for-profit. It's just going to change the dynamic of the city if Bohemian people can afford to live in the city. There's a guy, Ian Savonius, and he had some sort of theory, and he called it that the new music was electroclash because, bands no longer have practice spaces. So instead of having a practice space, you sit down with your computer and you use a drum machine and you play in your apartment, and like you're saying, you record your own thing. Instead of you live in a group house and you put a bunch of sponge stuff on the wall and you play, your band practices until the neighbor bangs on the wall.
Yeah, and I remember, there was always the local holes for the couriers to go to, and so whether it was Lucky Bar, Midtown or something like that. But back in the day, the 930 Club, back when it was on F Street, and DC Space was right there on the corner, and I'd get down there all the time, and you'd always see the couriers down there. So they'd be down there checking out the music, not even just the musicians, but other people that just like the underground music world. And so it was just such a cool vibe back in that era where we ruled the city. I mean, we really did.
No, there was a time when messengers would congregate at DuPont Circle, and I've always felt that it's best to leave a path. I mean, it would just be so many bikes around the fountain that people could not walk through the circle. And then you wonder why people hate messengers. That's probably beyond smoking pot, drinking beer, or zigzagging through traffic. Just like taking over the park. And and then
they were afraid to walk through there. I sat on the circle many nights, and those were usually Friday nights at DuPont after everybody cashed their checks. Other than that, during the day, it was always Farragut, but during working hours. But yeah, DuPont was in the evenings and especially on Fridays. And we would fill half the circle up, just everybody around the benches.
And then Mount Pleasant was, full of group houses. And if there was a messenger party, there would be bikes locked on bikes. Yeah. And to the point where, you'd have to have the wisdom, lock it up around back or down the block, or else you're not leaving till everybody else leaves.
Yeah, you lock your bike to another bike. Yep. Those were all up at Jim Rapp's house up in Mount Pleasant.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of messenger houses.
There was a lot of them out there, but I joke because that's where Rapp lived, and up there we call it Rocky Road, right? So.
Yeah, Jim Rapp was, in his time, so because it was, there were probably, 3, maybe almost 4 decades of bicycle messenger presence in DC, it's not fair to say every decade had its personality, but in a lot of ways, it's a simple way to break it down. There are different personalities to which, the bicycles that were ridden, the uniform that they wore, the type of person. Now, there were people who worked straight on through, but you know what I'm saying? Like, there was a point where there was no fixed gear. There was a point where, and there was no there was a point where people just rode a bike, any bike. Mm-hmm. And then maybe they thought, like, I'm going to ride this bike. Oh, mountain bikes are hip. Well, I like the mountain bike, but I'm going to put slick tires on it. Handlebars are too wide. I'm going to narrow my handlebars. And then there was evolution into the fixed gear, because...
I was going to say, track bikes came out and fixed gear, no brakes.
Yeah, do you remember any more of the Alley Cats?
Just that they would have them, I'd see the cards, where they had to get to, and I like to try and figure it out myself because I'd give them clues as to, what they were looking for, where the check-in point was. But I thought it was just such a really cool idea, and the fact that there wasn't an organization that was putting this together, but it was so well organized. You didn't have group chats to let everybody know about it. You didn't have, guys sitting there on a computer printing this stuff out, knowing how to. It was all done very, very organically and very underground, but it was so well attended and very well organized. And I just love that, the fact that here's just a group of guys that love to ride. And I would even think, I'm like, you guys have been riding all day, every day. You would think the last thing you want to do on a weekend is go ride another, 20 miles or whatever, blitzing around the city. But they love to ride. They love their bikes. Their bikes was a part of them. And I can completely relate to that because I would see, you would talk about somebody, and they might not know who you're talking about, but they're like, what does he ride? And as soon as you describe their bike, I know who he is, right? They knew you by the bike you rode. So you became kind of one with your bike. Your bike was part of your identity, which was really neat. And in the jet ski world, it was the same thing. It's like, who's that guy? It's like, oh, he rides that 151 bike or boat. And we're like, oh, yeah, I know who he is. And so I love the fact that the bike became part of their identity.
Yeah, and it was the same with the motorcycles. And, it's, like I said, the bike messengers don't even realize, like, there's a whole other culture out there. Now, the car people, they're left out. They got nobody. Because they don't have to hang out, and there's no way for them to congregate because they can't all park together. What's that?
Yeah, they're all isolated.
Yeah.
The only time they hang out is if they're on the list and they're fifth down and they come up to the office and they're sitting around and you got 4 or 5 car drivers sitting out front sitting on a list. That's the only time they really conjugate.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was a band called the Meat Men and the singer Tesco V. It was a weird comedic punk rock band, but the music was really good. I mean, they had this record called War of the Super Bikes, but he was tapped into stuff. And I remember at the old 930 Club, he was playing one time, and there was a strong messenger presence, and he was a motorcyclist. And I remember seeing him. I think he might have worked for the telephone company, seeing him in an elevator downtown. And I remember he had this one song, and it's totally inappropriate. But he's a comedian. He's just trying to be funny. And the song was "Camel Jockeys Suck," and it was a anti-cab driver song. And he's a motorcyclist. And as a cyclist, you just have these relationships with vehicles and the cab drivers and their erratic driving style and their inability to see anything around them. And the arrogance. I could almost get hit, and they would talk like I was in the wrong.
Yeah, I remember one time we used to have meetings. We'd have meetings with the bike messengers, periodically, and we would discuss things. And I remember one time we were all getting together up in Adams, Morgan, and in comes Kingfish riding in, singing this song, "I Hate Cars." He wrote a whole song, and he's sitting there just singing at the top of his lung how he hates cars. And it was just funny, but it's relatable to the cabs and the camel jockeys.
Yeah, and you were talking about, that was at the old 930 at 930 F Street in DC Space. I don't know, Kingfish. So I know him, but I didn't know him, and he had a whole life before he was old and gray. And, I saw some DC Space photos, and I saw a very young Kingfish. And so, I think maybe a lot of the messengers, there was no social media. So instead, people might have gone home and showered, but a lot of them didn't. But messengers would take over a bar, and some bars were regular messenger bars, and nobody else could go to. It could be Common Share or Asylum, literally, 65 to 80% of the crowd in that bar was messengers. If you were going there and you didn't enjoy messenger personality, you weren't going to have a good time. But also, if there was a happy hour or a beer special, the messengers would chase that. Again, it was the times, and that people went out a lot more because there was no other way for people to interact, and there was no dating site. How were you going to meet somebody if you wanted to hook up and have sex? It wasn't, I guess they had the personals in the city paper, but I'm not saying like raunchy, you're hoping to find your future ex-wife or something, and you would go out every night.
We had some girl bike messengers too that were pretty hardcore. We had one girl, can't remember her name. She came down from Boston. She was riding a fixed gear, right? No brakes. And I was just like, and that was sketchy for me at first, allowing them to ride these bikes with no brakes. I'm like, man, I don't know. And they had to really prove to me that, they can do this safely because, we're family, and I don't want my friends and family out there, doing this dangerous stuff. So when these fixed gears and no brakes first came out, I had a hard time with it. But she was hardcore, man. She was from Boston. And we had quite a few different female bike messengers. I remember one was, her name was Alex. I think she was Latvian. and I don't know if you know her or not. She dated the guy Jeff that went to Japan for a while, I believe. I can't remember his last name. So, but it was really cool. Some of the girls that we had riding for us. That was always a neat part. Also, that it wasn't just these kind of at one point somebody described our industry as being made up of misfits, derelicts, and felons. And maybe some part or percentage of it was, we all fell into there. We probably all fall into the misfit a little bit category. But seeing some of these girls who just kind of really had it together, but they just loved the lifestyle. And they were just tough enough to get out there and grit it out and grind it out with these guys on these bikes in any condition. I just had mad respect for them.
Yeah, and you mentioned James Kearns and James Kearns' wife, Sheba Farron. She was a bike messenger.
I remember Sheba.
But Sheba, and I need to get with Sheba and interview her because it's not my story to tell. But they had this thing called the DC Bicycle Messenger Association, and they were working for workers' rights. And I don't know much about it. It's Sheba's story, not mine. But Sheba's amazing because as a cyclist in DC, I would be out on my bike and I would see, let's say, the road cyclists of Rock Creek Park, and maybe it's the Goon Ride and they're coming back, or there's a pace line coming up Park Road out of Rock Creek, and there's blue-haired Sheba Farron, the lead bike, and I mean the rest are men. She won world championships, not in the women's category, but in the open category, and
wow.
And so it's true. These women were tough as nails. They were messengers, and I mean, there. I'm sure there was some novelty occasionally. I'm sure you, as a company, companies might have been like, not necessarily a gross man saying send the girl by, but I think it's good for business, good for relations.
Yeah, and it was all on merit, their qualifications. There was nothing about inclusion back then, right? It wasn't like, hey, I got to have this percentage of this demographic or otherwise. It was all merit. It was all, are you qualified? Are you capable? Are you good enough to do this? And they were. They got their positions all on merit. And they proved it over and over to me every day that, they deserve to be there. And
well, on a commission job, if you can't do it, you're not going to make money to stay and do it.
Yeah, and it really came down to being self-motivating and policing because, like you said, some days you're going to make $33, right? But, our messengers, I mean, these guys were pumping out, 60-plus deliveries a day a lot of times. For a bike messenger, that's a lot. And they had their paychecks to show it. We used to post our totals on the wall. So everybody, during the week, when your paycheck, everybody saw how many deliveries you did each day at the end of the week and how much you made. And it became a competition. The bikers wanted that. They loved the competition. And
the transparency is amazing. But Jeff, can we pause? My dog is looking at me that he has to go out. I have to take a piss.
Take him.
Can I call you back in Can I call you back in 5?
Absolutely.
All right, Jeff. I'll call you back in 5.
I'll see you. All right. Bye. Hey, Joel.
Hey, Jeff. So, we're back. I let the dog in. I let him out, let him in. He's, he wants to go for a walk, but that's not going to happen. So we were just talking about, end of the week, everyone gets paid, and you've got this, transparency where everyone gets to see how much work people. There's a competitiveness, but also I think it's the fact that you let everyone see it, because under their breath, people would be like, why is that guy getting hooked up? Or why are they getting all the work? But if they see this, maybe it prevents the dispatchers from playing favorites to that level.
A little bit. I mean, you did always have they were like, oh, there was always a joke, because Kingfish always was ruling, right? And so it's like, everybody's feeding the fish. It's like, don't feed the fish, man, because, that was the thing. It's like, you're feeding somebody. That means you're giving them the best work or extra work or something like that. And but for the most part, it sparked more competition for some of the we'll say younger or newer guys. It showed them what could be made. You can make $1,800 a week out of here if you hustle, if you're here in the morning early, if you work late, if you're, if you don't disappear for an hour, those types of things. So I think it did more good than the little bit of, stuff every now and then that you would get, you're feeding this guy or that guy.
All right, so Kingfish was a top dog. Can you think of anybody else who was a big earner with you?
Oh, yeah. Of course, Gibson, Kearns, Owen, those three guys, they were killing it. I'm trying to think of totals, but I would say these guys they're always busting $1,000 a week, in the heyday when there was the work. And so, for the resumes that some of the guys carried, and we used to joke that, a bike messenger, you could put your resume on a button, right? I can get from A to B and carry heavy things, that kind of thing. And to be able to make, $1,200, $1,500 pretty consistently a week was good money.
Yeah, I'd like to make that now. It's...
Yeah, right. Even in this day and age. But to think, and they could do that. And I did that as a car messenger. I'd be downtown at 7:30. I'd be the first one in, last one out. And I was, my checks were $1,500 a week pretty consistently. And so, and I'd be happy if I get closer to that, $1,800 mark.
Well, I think that's how the commission world worked. And, if you weren't there at 7:30 or at least at 9 on the dot, you might as well come in at 11, because you weren't there for them. They're not going to be there for you, and you missed it. So, yeah.
Right. And it did slow down at lunchtime, right? So the secretaries and everybody, they were at lunch, and so there wasn't so much work coming out at that point. So if you didn't come into 11, you got a handful of runs before lunch, and then now you're trying to make it up in the rush hour.
Yeah, it could be 12. It could be dead from 12 to 2. I used to say you got to get 12 by 12.
Nice, I like that.
Yeah, because otherwise, you're not going to make it on that day.
And on the car side, it's like you would get a set of runs. I was a car dispatcher for years. I had 35 drivers, and we had 90-minute delivery times. And so you could only leave with so much, if the suburbs, say you're going to Fairfax, right? It's like, here's an Arlington, here's a round trip to Tyson's and one to Fairfax. You got to go, because other than that, you're not going to make the Fairfax by 90 minutes. And that's 90 minutes from the time they called in. So you got to pick all three of those up. So we would scoop sometimes. We'd have the bikers scoop the work that was hard for the cars to park, right? If you're down at Federal Triangle or something like that, picking up FTC, you don't want to dig around down there trying to find parking. So we'd have the messenger scoop, and we had drop boxes all through town where they can just go scoop the package, drop it in there. We would pay the biker a little bit, whatever that pickup area was. So if it was $6 from Federal Triangle to where he dropped it in Midwest, then the biker would get $3. And the car's drivers loved it because they could go in and they could pick up 3 deliveries. And sometimes they could get 4 or 5 now because they didn't have to do the pickups. And so the very first drop box that we had was this big wooden box, probably about 3 feet tall, looked like a little mailbox. Lid popped up, the whole top of the thing was on hinges, and there was a nice rounded slot. One of the messengers made it, and it had the big M Metro logo on it. I still have that right now at my house. It's so cool. And we had that at Speedy Q Printing for quite a while. It was up there. That was one of our clients. And then I think we moved it down to IDB, which is another one of our big clients. But it was really neat having these drop boxes because it allowed the bike and the car messengers to kind of collaborate a little bit, and sometimes they would just meet them. Hey, meet me here in the alley, and just drop them instead of at a drop box. It's like, go scoop these picks, and then meet him at the alley at Errant Fox, and they'd meet up there. So it gave them a chance to interact a little bit with the car messengers because it was a lot of us and them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You built a better mousetrap because the notion of picking up and passing off, you could even waste 5 minutes on a corner. You're on one corner and the car's 4 cars in at a diagonal, but no, the drop box it's the drop box. Yeah. It's not person trying to connect with person, or you go to meet them you see their vehicle, you're at their vehicle and they're going to take a piss. You're like, I just want to drop this off, and it's an empty vehicle and you wait, but the drop box is like it's a better mousetrap. It makes it more efficient because the messenger, and probably first floor, like what a great opportunity. The messenger doesn't have to get into an elevator. They don't need a signature. Do they just put it in?
Yeah, and it helped mostly the car drivers. They can consolidate. They can get more runs on their stroke. Right. It was all about strokes for the bike messenger. It's like, hey, you're starting in Georgetown, you're going all the way through town to the hill if you're going that far, right? Or it's back and forth to Georgetown, or back and forth down to Press, or back if you're going all the way to the hill and back. You can pick up a lot of stuff and get there. For the car driver, they're trying to go in a straight line out to the suburbs. So if they're going, like I said, to Manassas even, they're going through, Roslyn, Arlington, Falls Church, McLean, Tyson's, Fairfax, out to Manassas. So they might get, 3 or 4 or 5 packages, but the pickups could be anywhere, right? This pickup's in Adams Morgan, that pickup's in Georgetown, this pickup's at the Press building, and then you got one pickup, somewhere else. And you're like, by the time you picked up those 4 packages, it's already going to take you an hour. So you're never going to make the deadline. So you can't get 4 packages. You have to get 2 or maybe 3 and go because the pickups are so spread out. This allowed the car drivers to have stronger strokes. I can remember car drivers going out of town with 7 and 8 deliveries because we can get them to them very quickly. And then they're spending their 90 minutes dropping, 2 or 3 in Crystal City, and then 1 in Alexandria, and 1 down in Mount Vernon, and then coming back around through Woodbridge. And they drop 5 packages. And so that really helped them a lot to keep their totals up. And they never minded giving the bike messengers their piece.
That's advanced dispatching,
Yeah.
It's using the different tools. The bicycle has its value as a tool, and the car driver in the outer perimeter is its own tool. And to use the benefit of each tool to do one job, it's advanced thinking.
Yeah.
I wanted to get back
to we were thinking about them. It let the messengers know that we were thinking about them and their money, and it saved the car drivers a lot of parking tickets also.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I need to keep a notepad because there's things we talk about and then I want to loop back on, and I've lost my tangent.
Sorry.
So I'm into the notion. I'm into the notion of the colorfulness and some of the characters. Do you remember the Regardis? No, that was 87. So that was before you. So you started in 90.
So that was at Metro. I worked at WEX for probably 8 years before I ever got to Metro.
Oh, okay. So you were there. So that's
where I cut my teeth was at WEX, and I worked at Cardinal Courier before that, and I think another one, Arrow or something like that, before I finally got to Metro. So I started in the courier industry in 83.
Wow. And that's interesting. And so we were talking. It's funny because I talked to a lot of the messengers and no one really explains it. And you and I can visualize it, and you talked about it. And so I just think it's like this, it's sort of like, the old stock exchange, pre-computer, where all the people are screaming and there's papers and this frenetic, energy. The law firm has a job and they want it done and they want it done now. They get on, the lawyer tells his assistant calls him, the messenger company. The messenger company has, a staff person whose sole job is to take down this information. And like you're saying, it's on this handwritten carbon, you probably had custom for your tasks, like the list of information that you need, and they pass it to a person, or they put it in an inbox. That person grabs the inbox in another room. They sort it, and then they tear a sheet, and it goes like, So, okay, I remember what I wanted to ask. You were saying that the dispatcher was like an air traffic controller. How did they know where the messengers were? Did they have a map, or was it just in their head?
It was just in their head. And that's what made them so valuable. Like, even when we get back to pricing out, working at Metro, most dispatchers were making, $35,000, $40,000, something like that. If you've been around a long time, $45,000. I brought in our dispatcher, Jeff Easthope, I think at $53,000. Like, when nobody else was even considering breaking that barrier. And, because that's what he needed to work there, and he was worth it. He was that good. And so, knowing, I was a really good dispatcher. Like I said, when I was at my height, I was dispatching with Bob Walton. He was a bike messenger. I was the car. We had, I think, at one point, 4 bike messengers, and I was still the only car messenger. We had 35 cars, and I was doing 600 deliveries a day, all within 90 minutes from the time they were called in. And at any given moment, you can ask me, where's 27, where's 35? And I can tell you, just left Falls Church, heading to McLean, be there in 8 minutes. And even to this day, I just amaze people because we're driving down the road and they're like, how long till we get there? I'm like, 11 minutes. And they're like, that's pretty precise. And we're 11 minutes away, right? That's just, everything was in your head. Everything was organic back then. There was no computers to keep track of people. There was no digital maps. There was, no tracking that I could look at a big digital map and see where the truck was. You knew because you checked in with the messengers and you had enough. It was a command and control situation with dispatch. And so, but you had to earn that trust and that respect because there was a lot of us and them between the dispatchers and the messengers. And because I had that respect for the messengers because I was a messenger first, I earned that because of my ability to dispatch. They would communicate with me. So when I'd tell them, drop 3 and call me before you head to the hill, they would do so. So they're like, hey, where's 12? I'm like, he'll be calling me from the press building in probably 2 minutes, and he's holding 4 to the hill then after that. And sure enough, in 2 minutes, I'd hear Gibson get on the line, 12, hey, whatever. That was on the bike side. But that was the relationship between the messengers, whether you're a biker car, and the dispatcher. And if it didn't work, it didn't work. You had no control over that messenger. That messenger did whatever they wanted to. And then you get the fallout to be like, okay, I'm clear in Fairfax. You're like, dude, I had one in Tyson's going to Fairfax. You drove right past it because you didn't call me where I told you to call me from. Oh, you want me to go back and get it? I'm like, no, it's too late now. I have somebody else coming through to get it. You missed the work, and now you've upset, you ticked me off because you're not listening. And so there was another delicate balance in that relationship there, and it was really built on trust and respect. And so when the guys really trusted you and respected you, it was easy to run 35 guys because they would do exactly what you asked them to do for the most part. Every now and then they'd forget, I forgot to call you from Arlington. It's like, okay, no big deal. But you knew where they were mentally because they all checked in. And I really prided myself on, probably out of all the roles I've held in the industry, being that car dispatcher, I felt like I just absolutely killed it. And I was one of those guys who just never missed a day of work. I could go a whole year and never miss a single day of work. Always downtown by 7:30, right? Last one out. Barely eat lunch. Somewhere between noon and 2 or 3, a bag of food would come through the window, and I would, the fries were still cold by the time I got to shovel in my mouth because I'm just so focused on dispatching because it's such a huge mental chess game. And it's fun when you do it and you do it well. But if you were not good at it, crash and burn, just like air traffic.
Yeah, and the messengers, the bike messengers, often talk about who their favorite dispatchers were, and some of those dispatchers, like there's one name, there was this guy Leo, and I don't know where he worked, but he was like a big brother to the people he dispatched. And
that's awesome.
What's that?
That's awesome.
Yeah, and maybe I don't know the names. I could actually check Facebook. There was an old poll that I think Scrooge had held a few years back.
Scrooge. Nice, there's a name.
So did Scrooge work for you?
No, but I know of Scrooge.
So Scrooge So Scrooge is a messenger legend, and we just now that the industry is evolved and devolved and changed and whatever it is, we almost don't have to, who is the longest running messenger is an interesting one, but I think that there needs to be like a hall of fame of there's Scrooge maybe did 35 years. I don't know what the years are. I always throw out data like I have it. But Scrooge worked, over decade plus years. Stuttering Mark worked decade plus years, on the street. So Kingfish, he might work a lot of years, but then the messengers come in like, oh, you need to throw an asterisk in there because he didn't work winters.
Yeah, he would take off every year. And, Kingfish was such a cool guy in the sense of how he lived his life. He would work and save his money, and then when he had enough money, whatever that was, he would go. And he would just go and he would stay away. He would go to a different country every year, right? In many countries. I think at one point when I talked to him, he had been to 128 countries, and I think he speaks basically 4 or 5 different languages he can kind of get through.
So you're saying there's 128 baby kingfishes, probably adults now.
Probably that many more in just Brazil, because when he went to Brazil the first time, he fell in love with it, and he went back there every year for probably 5 or 6 years until finally he retired and then went to Brazil to live. And he would send me pictures. He's like, I took 6 months and I rode my bike across the Yucatan Peninsula, right, with the indigenous people there. And you can just picture Kingfish, just in there speaking Spanish, or he's down speaking Portuguese and whatever else. And he was just, and I'd be like, how are you living? He's like, I had $16,000 this year, and I just went and I rented this little hut on the water for $300 a month, and I pick up the girls and we'd just go, and we'd it's so much cheaper in most of the places and he would just go, and he goes for the first few days. I would live like a warlord. I'd rent out the penthouse of some high-end hotel, live up there, and then I'd just kind of settle in, and he would make $10 or $15 or $20,000, however much he saved up, last as long as he could, and then he'd come back and he'd work again. And I'd like, dude, that's insane. What a way to live your life.
And yeah, I think that that was there were a lot of people who were using it like that, as a way an opportunity to live life on their own terms. And yeah, like I said, there aren't many jobs where you can, and he may have did what he did, and you might have known what he was doing, but it may not have been 2 weeks' notice. And I mean, I know you're saying he was in contact, but he more than likely just showed up. He left and he showed up. And a lot of people did that. And the traveling thing, we spoke about musicians go on tour. There was a period in the 80s where I know a lot of skateboarders migrated to this area so they could skate at Cedar Crest. And a lot of them needed a job because, there were these brothers, Billy and Steve Smith, and they're from England. And, they're from England. They don't have work permits or visas, whatever. A bike messenger was a job. Somehow people could get in under the radar, but they were here to skateboard, and they would skate the steel ramp that was out of this country club in Northern Virginia. But they weren't the only ones. There were a lot of you had mentioned this woman from Lafayette or whatever, but there were these a lot of people from around the world. I think somehow, I don't know, maybe they just put down like a handful of numbers and said, yeah, that's my social security number, and
yeah, it was always interesting, kind of finding out the real names and the real, identities of some of the messengers, because they had their own ID sometimes, and you're like, okay, no, this is between you and Uncle Sam.
Yeah, exactly.
You guys sort it out, so you're just like, hey, I don't know. It looks like a real ID to me. You got your back pass. We're good to go. I just put them on payroll. And so it wasn't like now where, I need, attestation forms, and I need your naturalization, or I need a DOB or a, birth certificate or a passport or something like that. Nowadays, trying to get employed now, they got to, triple check everything, and then still you got to worry about it.
Yeah, it's a recurring thing, analog versus digital.
Yeah.
But don't you miss a map, an ADC map? Not even fold up, but like a book?
I have a love for maps, probably like, very few people because of that. And, and being a car courier, you had to have all your maps. And I can remember sometimes they'd send you out to, Eastern Shore, and you're like, you wasn't going to buy that. So you get as far as you can go, and you'd stop at 7-Eleven, you'd go, you'd look at it, you'd memorize it, and you'd get there, right? And so I really, truly have a love of maps. I still have my big dispatch map of DC before 66 was built. So it's a pretty cool big map of the Beltway and just beyond there of the DC area, and there was no 66 on that map. I was like, this is pretty cool.
Did you, like you were saying, 12 to 2 could be a dead zone. Well, there was over across from Farragut, there was a map store.
Oh yeah, on I Street right there.
That's right. But did you ever go in? There was a map room at Department of Interior, and it was open to the public. Or, like I said, you could just go in these buildings. And I bought all these satellite map of DC or whatever. If I had hiked or been something, I went there years later. I went to Peru and whatever. I would just buy. The Peru I got in Peru, but I would get these weird topo maps of maybe where I like to mountain bike or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just because of my courier days is when I really just had a love of maps, and I'm that way right now. It's like still, and one of the things that I absolutely love, and I think every courier does, is you can get to anywhere in this town and you never need your map anymore, And so, because I was a car messenger, I know all the suburbs. I know, 5 different ways to get, from here to Rockville if I had to go, that type of thing. So I never sit in traffic anymore. If there's traffic, I just turn and I make up a new route as I go along. The only time I ever need GPS is if I'm going into like a neighborhood looking for a house. But if I'm just going to a city or any of the main, thoroughfares, it's like I know how to get everywhere. It's many, many years after I would date a girl, they'd call me back up, and the only time they were calling me is when they're lost in D.C. or looking for a place to park, and that's how they remembered me. And they were just like, just call Jeff, he'll know how to get there.
Yeah,
everybody loves that because it gives you so much confidence. It's like I can go anywhere, and I don't ever worry about getting lost.
But now anybody with a phone
can feel the same way, but they're just following the blue line. They have no idea where they are. And if they hit traffic or an incident, not recalculating. Right?
Well, what ends up happening is I am not very savvy with the map on the phone because I don't feel like I need it. But somebody who is savvy, it does tell you where the blockage is or faster routes or whatever.
Nowadays it does. It'll show you the traffic. And that's the one thing that I'll use GPS for that they know that I don't, is if there's traffic on this part of the Beltway or that part of the highway, this way or that. But I'll tell you what, so many times I look at it and I'll be with somebody and they pull up the GPS and I'm like, wait, where are we going? I'm like, no, don't go that way. That's ridiculous how the map's trying to take GPS. Sometimes it's just absolutely absurd the directions that they're giving you to go someplace.
But I don't like radios in the Tour de France. And the alley cats, like now the kids GPS it. I love to just use the intuition.
Yeah.
And it's just the brain is, people's brains are evolving differently. They will never, if you're born into, the navigation system on the phone, you may never be able to read a map in the same way.
Yeah. And nobody will have the appreciation for them like we do, this newer generation, since, they don't have to look at a paper map anymore. They're like, oh, whatever. They have no appreciation for it at all. So I love the maps, and I look at some of these maps of, I think I I wish I knew who it was. We had, I think it was 4 of our bike messengers. I think they all worked for us. Maybe there was one that didn't. They went to Australia, and they sent me a map of Australia. They rode their bikes to the 4 furthest points, north, south, east, and west of Australia, across the continent. I'm like, that is absolutely epic. And they said, I don't know which coast it was, for the last bunch of hours, they had to carry their bikes across the rocks to get to the seashore line. It wasn't like you just ride up to the ocean to the beach. And they wanted to get to the water. They wanted to get the 4 furthest points, east, north, west, and south. And they would send me pictures also of these. You picture like a dirt road where you just see the 2 tracks and the little, the strip in the middle. They're like, we were on this road for 3 days and never saw another soul. And I'm like, how cool is that? That was like how hardcore the bike messengers of DC were.
Yeah, so was Drew Walker one of the people of that crew?
That makes sense.
Now, yeah, so that's legendary. I think what happened was Drew went to do a race, like west to east.
Yeah.
And then he was so inspired that he was like, I gotta do more. I'm gonna go, north to south. And yeah, that was the end of his relationship. His girlfriend's like, I can deal with you being gone that long, but any longer, we're done.
Yeah, I don't even know how long they were gone, but I remember that and seeing a map of Australia with them charting out and I was just like, wow.
Do you know Kevin Keefe?
Legendary. Kevin Keefe, sure.
Yeah, Kevin.
13.
What's that?
13. That was his number, 13. He always sounded like a little Irish man, too. He's like, 13. And Mark, 20, Stuttering Mark.
Stuttering Mark. So Stuttering Mark would go into the analog history along with Scrooge of, of being, made 3.5, I need the data points, I'm curious. So yeah, but Kevin Keefe would go on Mexico adventures with a cast and crew of other, DC bike messengers. And it was just a different time. There was no check it out online. There was no Instagram. Fewer people traveled the world at times. It was more out there.
Yeah. And the funny thing is so many of these couriers were more worldly and more traveled than the lawyers and the people that they were serving as a courier. And that white collar group always looked down on the couriers, right? Like the street people almost. And they had no idea that these guys probably had more culture or more worldly experience than they ever will.
Yeah, it's definitely don't judge a book by its cover. Yeah. And it's true.
But I was so impressed with the accomplishments of so many of the bike messengers, like Drew Walker with that legendary Australia run, or Kingfish riding clear across the Yucatan Peninsula on a freaking bicycle, those types of things. It's like, come on, man, who else is going to experience life like that and do those types of absolutely legendary and epic adventures? Awe-inspiring.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it's a different time. I mean, it's hard. It would be harder to afford such an experience. Plane tickets are more expensive, and I mean, a bike messenger or someone. The pay of a bike messenger, I mean, you were talking about peak and high numbers, but, I think for a long time, a lot of people just went for the $100 day, and then now it's still shooting for $100 day. But you can't just rent a $250 room in Mount Pleasant. Rent is more expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, and bike messenger was somewhat generational also. I would have somebody to come in, and then all of a sudden, a lot of times it was like a cousin. But then I can remember it's like, when, it was, a little brother would come up through the ranks or something like that. I don't remember any father sons or anything like that, but there just seemed to be, somebody else from that family would come up and then come through, 12 years, 15 years later. It's like, oh, you remember my Uncle James? Yeah, he was a bike messenger here.
Well, Scrooge has an adult son, Aaron. And Aaron was a bike messenger for decades. And similar to Scrooge, I think he moved to food delivery, and it's just not practical on the bike.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's a father-son duo, following the footsteps, doing the same similar career path. Yeah, Scrooge played music. There was a band called Scooter Trash, I think.
Trying to remember if I knew that. I know I was thinking of Paul Hofford. He was the dispatcher at Wex. He played guitar too. And Doug Burst, he was one of our messengers. He was a car guy. He plays guitar. Still friends, still know these people. Doug and I are very close friends still.
What about Alec Armbruster?
Man, I don't know if I know that name.
He was in a messenger band, I think Flinch or something like that. And died young, but part of the scene for a long while, and a percussionist and a good dude.
That's cool.
It was definitely
not cool that he passed away, but cool that he played music and got to be part of that scene.
Yeah, it's an interesting job. I think it's a dangerous job in the respect, not because of taxi cabs and buses, but because it's not a resume builder.
No, it's a lifestyle, and that's just it's just the lifestyle that you have to be the right person with the right character and personality, and just that a lot of it willpower too, just to get up and push yourself, knowing, hey, this is my livelihood also, and it's not easy. I always tell everybody, that everybody's like, oh, that job's so easy. I'm like, no, the job is simple, but it is not easy. It's simple. All you're doing is picking up a package and going from A to B, but it's not easy. You have every element working against you, trying to keep you from getting there, and danger at every corner, right? And you're splitting lanes, you're flying through, let alone dealing with, I remember Kingfish one time described to me when I first moved here and came up, he was trying to describe the summers to me. He said, you get behind a bus and the exhaust feels cool. He's like, that's how hot and muggy it gets in DC in like August. And I'm like, just that, visual, I'm just like, wow. I'm like, yeah, I see what you're saying. But yeah, that's the heat that they're dealing with. And then you have the audacity to call me up and complain that, hey, your courier in the elevator smells like sweat. Can you do anything about that? Or they get in, they're dripping wet on our floor. Can you do anything about that? I'm like, it's pouring outside and they're delivering your package. They're going to be wet, right? And people just don't get what they have to go through to get that envelope to you. Yeah,
the wet courier in the elevator.
Yeah.
Their favorite question: is it raining outside?
Not drip on me? Yeah. Is it raining outside? It's like, no, I just went through the car wash. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. But there is a real disconnect between the clientele and the couriers. That's the bridge the gap that we had to bridge is the office staff, right? And I found out once I went to sales for the courier company, I saw the other side. I saw what now the clients see, because I'm in there talking with them, sitting now in the boardrooms and the mail rooms. And then I can see and have these conversations with them, and it helped me to align expectations and the service that we provided. Because then I was able to come back and say, we need to do this better, or we need to start doing that. And I got a little pushback from the couriers and from the staff and that. And I said, look, they're like, we're never going to keep you happy. And I'm like, if you can't keep me happy, you can't keep the clients happy, because all I'm telling you is what the clients are asking for and what they're expecting of us. And so I'm just the liaison at this point. I'm just setting up the kind of the objectives that we have to hit these marks if we truly want to make them happy and meet their expectations. And so it elevated our game. So when I first bought the company, I spent over a year, probably 15 months or something like that, refining the process of everything we did to try to align it with the expectations of what I learned from our clients. I'm like, I don't want to go out and try and sell this service and have to go back and apologize over and over because, I know we're not hitting the marks already right now. So if I go tell them, yes, we can do what you're asking me to, I know we're not. We can't. in some of those areas. And so I came back and I refined the process. And the way I did that was I went to every different department and I asked them, write down every problem you encounter, every problem that you can think of that you ever faced. And you can imagine what the bike messengers came up with, right? Everything from the elements to the security to, whatever it was. And the customer service reps had their own list of problems. We came up with a list of like 300 industry problems that we deal with every day. Somebody in some department, whether it's your dispatcher, whether it's your whatever it was. And then we figured out, okay, how can we get rid of these problems so that we don't have them? And we broke the list into two parts. Ones you can eliminate and they should never happen again, and ones that are going to happen, and here's what you do about it when that happens. And so I remember I was dispatching one day and I had one of my car drivers called me up and he's like, hey, I got a flat. I was like, all right, change your tire and call me in like 20 minutes. Let me know you're back on the road. And then he goes, I don't have a spare. And I thought in that moment, there it is, right there. Both problems. One problem, you can't say I'm never going to get a flat again. You can't do anything about it, right? That's just a problem that's going to happen. But you can never not have a spare. And so it's like, here's the two problems that we run into. It's like, so the ones that we could get rid of with either a policy or a procedure so that it never happened again, we got rid of so many problems and it refined our process. And then when those other problems did come up, we already had 1 or 2 levels of contingencies. This is what you do when that happens, right? When that building's on a fire alarm that's closed, when the queen's in town and we can't get through here. It's like all those kind of crazy things that are out of our control. What do we do? And so that was a big, big learning curve for us. But that, again, got us to that level of certitude in our delivery service to where I could go out and sell that all day long because I knew we were that good. We were that Super Bowl team. I knew we could take it all the way. But that was a long process. And it was everybody helping out. We were then a real team because, you talk about the S&Ms, customer service reps and dispatchers were an us and them, right? Management and everybody else was an us and them. And so this was a way for us to really unify. But we would have meetings. I would have weekly meetings with the department, all the dispatchers, all the CSRs. Then I'd have monthly meetings with the couriers, sometimes with just the bike or just the car. And then we'd have company meetings with everybody together. And we would talk about these things and think, we would be like, what is a better way to do this? How can we do these things to make us better? Because once we're better, we can charge more, right? Or we keep our clients from being stolen, or we keep from service failures losing clients. And so it was a real unified effort, and it brought the company together, and it made us strong as we were. And I feel like we were probably the strongest company out there.
Well, I'll tell you, Jeff, I mean, you're like TED Talk material. I think that, like you have like this business coach potential, and I think I really respect like a lot of the ways you sculpted your company and the way you interacted, treated, and respected, your staff. It shows you've got a lot of character.
Thank you so much. We had a strong culture, and I believe that we broke it down to 2 simple parts. There was the courier part and there was the client part. And I said, there's only 2 things that you need as a courier. 1, to be treated with the respect that you deserve, and 2, to allow you to make the money that you want to make. If you can make the money that you want to make and you're in an environment where you're respected and treated, properly, that's a great way to start. That's a good foundation. Everything else is kind of like sprinkles on the cupcakes, right? So we focused on those things. It's like we got to create a vehicle to where these guys can make as much money as they want. And the vehicle was get the work and don't overhire and distribute the work fairly. Those people that were really good, give them more work. If you could get 8 runs in on that stroke and to make the deadlines, give you 8 runs. And we knew the guys that were good for it. And we weren't feeding them. We were letting them reach their potential. And if they made more than you, that's because they could get 8 runs done in that stroke where you can only get 6. And they could do it consistently. And they earned that trust of the dispatcher where he's like, nope. He's like, I don't need to leave yet. I can handle 1 more. It's like, dude, you have 40 minutes and 4 drops. He's like, I got it. We're like, all right, go pick up Georgetown and get across the bridge. And so we'd have that respect with one another. And that's the real respect, not just treating you nicely when you walked in, the respect of listening to you also and believing in you. And then on the client side, there was only two things they wanted: the service they expected and a price that they were okay with. And so I would go in with them and a lot of the clients, and I would sit down with them and I'd say, let's you and I create the price list together. You tell me where you go to the most, or where you need a discount. It's like, hey, we go to Chevy Chase all the time. Can I get a little break on Chevy Chase? Sure. So I figure if you're helping me create the prices, you're going to be happy with them, right? And I was like, this is the easy stuff. I can change the price with the stroke of a pen, but changing your service takes years to really, get it to where like we had it. So it allowed me to focus just on service, and that's why I didn't lose clients. Like if I lost a client, I was really upset. And I learned from, actually it was, one of the, we'd have these owner meetings with all the other owners, and boy, what a basket of cats those guys were. But they said the industry standard was you would lose about 10% of your clients a year. And I'm like, I have 1,500 clients. I would lose my mind if I lost 10% of them. I'm upset if I lose, 1 to 5 a year. And sometimes they were just even out of our control, right? They merged with somebody else. A law firm would merge, and they used their carrier company instead of ours. Nothing I could do. I'd go in and fight for it, but, I never won. And so those were the two things we focused on in our culture, is giving our clients what they want by a good price and a good service, and giving our couriers what they want by letting them make as much money as they wanted to and treating them with dignity. And that was the formula for success, really, and probably still is to this day.
Well, yeah, I think that, currently we have, we go into these places and we don't get good service. There's an element of resentivism where the worker doesn't feel appreciated as a worker, or they don't feel their payment is enough, so they resent their employer, and so they do less work. It's like a downward spiral effect, but you see it time and time again. But it does come down, I believe it comes down to poor management. Get someone who will do the job and treat them with respect and pay them well, and yeah, that's the formula. But that's not where our world's at right now.
No, it's not. And we live in a world of mediocrity right now. So if you're doing great, you're above the curve. Right now, Satisfactory's, on par with most people. They're just like, what? It doesn't matter what it is, right? So whatever service you're looking for, it's like, good enough is what people shoot for nowadays.
Well, I'll tell you, this podcast, I'm going for good enough. So I think you just described me. How did I become this? I think some of it is because I'm not you, and
Well, I think there's a deterioration of our fiber also is a society that we just settle, for the most part. It's like, what? And because, we don't have artisans anymore that are creating like, our ancestors used to. They don't take that pride in their craftsmanship. Now they turn out guitars on freaking machines that, it doesn't matter, before they were all handcrafted, right? And so it's like there's that mentality that when you come from kind of the salt of the earth that, hey, I'll work this with my own blood, sweat, and tears and put my, back into creating something, whether it's even just my own livelihood, there's a sense of pride that comes with that, like Mom taught us. Do your best. I don't care if you're sweeping the floor. I don't care if you're a janitor. You're going to sweep the floor better than anybody else, right? You're going to do the best job you can do in sweeping that floor. And then learning other things like treat everybody the same. So whether you're treating, I would be able to get into any building after hours because I treated the janitor just the same as I would treat the CEO of the company. With the same respect. I'd greet them. Hi, how you doing? Hope you're having a great day, that kind of thing. And so doors were locked. Guess what? They're opening the door for me. They're opening the elevator for me. They're getting me right into the suite. So they're like, did you have to slip it? I'm like, nope, it's on the reception desk. They're like, how did you get in? It's 9:00 at night. I'm like, it's on the desk. We're good. And it's from those basic things that a lot of times now this generation just doesn't have. They don't have those people skills. And they don't have that consideration either, that level of respect, I think.
Well, I would say, as a father of two amazing sons, I think that, we have done some disservice to our children. I cut lawns, but my kids, I never made them rake leaves, cut lawns. I mean, they may have raked leaves once for a photo shoot or something, but,
Right.
but it's a different time, and, and some of it, and I feel as if I had success to a degree. I felt that my children's job was to be children, not to work, because you work your whole life. And I was, I felt like I worked too much as a child and it was worth nothing, But
Yeah.
Now we have a generation, they say the Gen Zs, they just don't want to work. And that's because, helicopter parents and, I'm guilty of I created, my kids are amazing, but there's a side effect, and the side effect is not wanting to work. Now, I don't want to work either, so I mean, I can't blame them, but I have to, and I understand that.
Right. Yep.
And I think. So here's a question. So we often wonder. So I mention it in every podcast that Washington, D.C. had a company called Urban Stems, and Urban Stems had a bicycle division, and they had employees that would deliver on Omnium cargo bikes, dozens of flowers each day. And after 11 years, that is now no more. But to me, it shows that there is still the capacity for there to be bicycle delivery services. It just, I think that society needs to make a conscious effort. And this is one thing that I go off about. I hate that the self-righteousness of the double parking of an Amazon, a UPS, or a FedEx truck. It creates traffic so someone else can get their package. Like there should be no right for them to double park. I just think in the urban centers, they should refuse any package, small box or envelope smaller. It should all either be like foot delivery or bicycle delivery. They could just fan out from the FedEx warehouse and have like 60 packages one way, just drop. Instead of the FedEx guy parking the truck, dropping 3 packages here, getting back in the truck, driving half the block, blocking again, going into the next building. It could be bicycles, and it could create more jobs for people. And FedEx could still have plenty of jobs in trucks outside of town. But cities, I just think that we put up with too much. In the neighborhoods, all day long, Amazon trucks are double parking because they have they don't want to park into a space because pulling in and pulling out is a risk of an accident. But me, I just want to drive. I don't use any of those 3 services. So for me, I just feel like, why is that company? It's like Exxon Valdez to me, it's like a big oil spill. I think it'd be corrected by society, outlawing the delivery trucks doing that, and then they have to find a different way, and that way is easy enough. Back to the bike, back to foot delivery.
I love it. I think it's brilliant. Call FedEx. You need to set up a hub where they just come and drop everything, and then it's delivered by hand or by foot or by bike.
I think it's a great idea, except
the urban areas.
The only problem is that it would all be e-bike. And yeah. I think that's a different thing. It's a fine car alternative, but it's a motorcycle. Mm-hmm. And then they would have large 3-wheeled cargo vehicles that can carry massive amounts, and those are just golf carts. I think that it could be done, and it's not like a John Henry story, man against machine. I think that man is capable. And I think that like the Omnium cargo bike, the bikes exist, they're lightweight, and if done correctly, it's not for everybody, but I think it would still work for a lot of people. You mentioned Stuttering Mark. He worked until his he had to be his mid-70s. And he only, a big part of him retiring, it's probably more because there is no messenger industry.
Yeah.
And legal weed. He probably lost business because there's stores that sell weed, because he's, I mean, I'm not trying to I did this photo project of DC Messengers. I took photos of bike messengers for 20 years from 2004 to 2024. And then I created these little mini books with themes, messengers in front of a hot dog stand, messengers in front of the Hirshhorn, messengers in Chinatown. And I thought I could probably create a book, Messengers That Deal Weed. Because there were a lot.
Coffee table book.
Yeah, exactly. And Jim Rapp would be on the cover.
Of course.
But it was classic, and weed is legal now, and whatever. But I don't want to go through the list, but the list is long, and
Sure.
But it was always curious to me, how do these people get in and out of the buildings? They're going through this X-ray machine, and I guess they're only looking for guns.
Yeah, crazy.
I know that a bicycle pump got me stopped many times.
That makes sense.
But I bet you a lot of I often ask the messengers, what's in the bag? Do you carry a pump? And I think a lot of the long timers always did, and then there was those who didn't and never did. Never, it's just, they just tried it, just because you're carrying extra weight. You have to have a bigger bag, and it always has to have. And if you carry a pump, you carry a tube. If you carry a pump and a tube, you carry a multi-tool. It just ends up being like this little Dennis and Menace thing where you just have like a bag full of stuff before you even get to your clipboard.
Yeah.
All right, Jeff. You know what? I think that this has been an amazing conversation. You're a great storyteller. You really shared some insight into the industry and the relationships between the different players. And you spoke about the evolution of the industry and your need to morph, move, and evolve. And I appreciate the time.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I love hearing some of the names I haven't heard in so long. And it'd be really neat to have some sort of reunion somewhere where we can all just get together and kind of just hang out. I'm sure some of the guys still do stay in touch. I've lost touch with a lot of them. I have Facebook friends with a few of them. We'd love to get together. Metro delivery still exists. We do, like I said, the commercial and residential moving now also. And so we've morphed into that. So now we have 4 verticals as opposed to just the one. And it was important because during the pandemic, we lost about 75% of our business on the courier side. That's a big chunk. And if I didn't have the moving, then I would have been probably like some of the other guys, maybe forced out or forced into retirement. But we were able to hold on, and I was able to, the commercial moving all stopped also, but we had residential. Everybody was buying houses. So I kept this going. And now the commercial is coming back, and we still had the storage going on. So that's the 4th vertical. And now we're making a big push coming back for the courier work. And it's different now, but it does exist. I mean, I know people out there that are running multi-million-dollar courier companies still. That it's different. Like I said, some of it could be medical, could be labs, whatever it is. Now you're delivering it's primarily tangibles of some sort, but it does exist. It's just different. And unfortunately, for the bike messengers, most of the work is not bikeable unless somebody like you, with a thought process of rejuvenating the bike world with work, an influx of work, like last mile delivery on bikes in the urban cities across the country, that would create a new need.
Well, I think that we need someone forward thinking. So I spoke about the double parking of all those vans, but so Now, there are already people doing DoorDash and other type things where they deliver single prescriptions. Now, what if they removed patients in urban areas, patients picking up prescriptions, and it became all delivery? You don't get it in 2 hours. The doctor can give you 2 painkillers and you can get your pills later that day or the next day, whatever it would be. But again, you just have a central hub where the prescriptions are sorted and packaged, and then they have the address, and a messenger fans out, and they just do drop and then return to base to take another parcel of many prescriptions. And what this would do is it would take every person who's gone to the doctor and has been given a script, and then they have to drive from the doctor to the Walgreens or CVS. They park, and then they hand the script to the pharmacist. Then they sit there for 45 minutes to 2 hours. Their car's been taking up a space, and they get back on the road. No, they could have just gone home from the doctor, and then it gets delivered the next day. And then what that ends up doing, it gives the individual more time. It gets a car off the road that doesn't need to be there, and it creates a job for a person.
Yep, I love it. We used to do prescription deliveries back in the day, and I remember going to CVS after it just transitioned from People's Drug to CVS, and I didn't get a lot of traction, a little bit, but we had I forget the name of the pharmacy. They had I think 2 or 3 different pharmacies downtown, and we ended up getting them as a client and delivering prescriptions, which is probably going to be more regulated in today's terms than it was back then, because you are delivering prescriptions. But it can be done, and it can be done better on bikes than it could be with an automobile. So I love your forward thinking. I love your the idea guy that you are, coming up with this thought process of, creating and rejuvenating a market for the bicycle messengers.
Well, I think that, we're in a moment right now where, we need like a New Deal type of reform. We're going through a crisis where unemployment, it's an issue. We're going to need job creation.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it now. Like, okay, so people are Uber delivery drivers, and now they've got this like robot cooler that rolls around the sidewalks. It's the same as the cashier and the self-checkout. We're removing jobs, and I get it, but people need jobs.
I remember reading an article, and this was years ago, and I just thought of this just as you were saying that, and it listed the top 10 jobs that were earmarked for extinction, and number 1 was cashier. And this was back when, if you can remember, maybe you went to Home Depot and there was 1 self-checkout, and probably none in the grocery stores yet. It was in that era, whatever time period that would be. Guess what was number 2? Couriers. We were number 2 on that list, being earmarked for extinction in that period of time. And I remember reading that going, holy crap, really? And again, I described like losing the banking work, losing the Senate and House doc work, losing the travel agent work. And I could just see big chunks of what we used to deliver every day on bicycles going away. And I was like, I knew there was some truth to that. And it didn't give a timeline, but it would have probably been, from the time I read that article, probably maybe 6 or 8 years. And by the 10th year, so much of that work was gone. There was no more filings to be done. All the filings were done electronically. House and Senate docs were available. Even in the library loans, all gone. I would go into the law firms, because now I have the moving company and we're moving the law firms. These giant libraries that they used to have were being reduced to just a few bookshelves. All the books are gone. And so that just takes another huge... Think about how many in the library loans you used to do as a bike messenger, right? Those were great. That was great work, because it was always a round trip, and there was always happened 2 times. right? Yeah,
No, and it was on the daily.
Yeah, and it was on the daily. It's like pick up an ILL from Sutherland going to, Hogan or something like that.
Yeah, I don't remember the account, but I can remember the location. 1667 L or something like that, and I would just jump in there, and I would, I would go look, and I'd see a stack of books waiting where they would be going out, and I would call my dispatcher at Apple, and I would say, hey, I'm over here at so and so. Like I would work the system. Like I don't want to sit for 2 hours, and I don't want to be on a list.
Can I take it?
Yeah. And they hated it. They hated it. They didn't like that. They didn't like me.
No, they didn't like it. But you were the big proactive, and some of the proactive couriers did that. And guess what? You got to work because you're sitting right in front of it. It's like, oh, yep, they just called it in. I guess you're there. Go ahead and take it. Or you would go over there and you'd be like, hey, is this stuff ready? Can you call it in now? Right? And then it's like, yep, they're calling it in now. It's like, hey, I'm here. Can I take this? They're like, shoot, it's on the list, but you're right there. I'll tell you what, take those 2 to Georgetown, and I'll send the other 3 to somebody else, right? So you would get the work by being that kind of, proactive courier.
Yeah, except,
circumventing the system a little bit, but so what, But
so the history, for a lot of bike messengers, for there to be a success story would be they would start their own company or they'd do something else, retire from the messenger work. Because it's not, to be the worker, it's not enough money. Like it's not like a family man, house owner, car type career.
No. And some, but probably very few, they found an in-house position and maybe they got, after everything kind of, fell away on the courier side, maybe they got employed there in the mailroom or something like that and was able to work up somewhere. I'm sure there's a few of those kind of stories to where, the bike messenger ends up in the boardroom type of thing. But those are few and far in between. Yeah,
Peter Jennings started in the mailroom. You just don't get those stories anymore.
Yeah. So, but, it can happen, but a lot of it's a mindset. And that lifestyle and that mindset, they're not looking for more. They're looking for enough, and they're looking for freedom, and they're looking to live life on their terms. And most of them did.
No, without a doubt. It's, I that's why I'm trying to collect this oral history. I want some of these stories. I want people to hear the stories. And I think in some ways, like even in these different times, people need to know that there's different ways to live your life. And, one way is not necessarily better than the other. Job security and health insurance, those are nice things. And that was the great thing about the notion of the, DC Bicycle Messenger Association is the people wanted to work that job and live life on their terms, but they wanted to do it where they made enough money that they got to, eat in restaurants and take vacations just like a normal person.
Yep.
The number of bike messengers that, they buy their bikes gray market. Who makes enough money to buy a several $1,000 bike? Not a bike messenger.
Not a bike messenger. Yeah. I always say, it takes a lot of, $7 deliveries to get to that first million. So, to be $1 million company, think about how many runs you have to do at, $8 and $10 and $12 each.
Yeah, and you just have to do the math.
Bike messengers only making a fraction of that. And so it's like, they're not your typical, homeowners that are buying a $3,000 bike, to do their job. They're survivalists at the basic level.
Yeah, there's a hole in the bottom of their pocket. The money goes in and it comes right out. This isn't, a few of them, maybe short-term goal. If you want to go to the Messenger World Championship or you want to travel or you want to take 3 weeks off, you save in the short term. But it wasn't a big, 401k, IRA,
No. But I don't want to diminish. That's some portion of it. But there were plenty of messengers out there that were family men, that had wives, that had homes, and both car and bike. A lot of the cars, the car, just having a car just showed at least one more level of responsibility, because now you have to at least, get it inspected and have insurance on it and things like that you didn't necessarily need for a bike. Well, at one point you had to license your bike, but it was a little different. But I had, take Bruce, for instance, right? Bruce, married, probably had a nice home that he lived in, somewhere maybe just out of the city. I'm not sure exactly where he lived. But there were bike messengers that really did have it together. That,
well, Bruce is an anomaly. Bruce, he still works for you, but he was working for multiple companies before other people were working for multiple companies.
Yeah.
For Bruce's 70th birthday, he threw an alley cat for himself for his birthday, and there were 70 or maybe there were only 35. But he's thrown these alley cats with so many checkpoints because that's just the way his brain works.
Yeah.
And
so there were so many bike messengers that had it together like that. That they were managing their finances just fine. They were living fine, comfortably. And so I don't want to take away from those guys, because there were plenty of them that were living that, maybe they didn't have the 401k and the health insurance and things like that, but they were managing and living within their means, and they were making it, put it this way. There was always the same group of people in my office trying to get their checks on Thursday when payday is Friday, right? Because they didn't make it to the end of the week. And so, or, hey, I need a loan to get me through to Friday. And it was only Tuesday. It's like, okay, well, you only made it to Tuesday with your money. So, the usual suspects would always come rolling in my office, somewhere midweek, and on Thursday always wanted to get their check. And those were the same guys that, guess what? When they got their check on Thursday, they didn't come to work Friday. So they had self-defeating habits, right? They just never learned to manage their money properly. And there was a group like that. And
cocaine, cocaine's a hell of a drug, but crack, those guys, the 80s, it's not my story to tell, but there's a guy I know who, that monkey was on his back and he was a dispatcher, and he had a day that just what's that?
Wow.
And his day just went haywire. And he's sober now, and he's retired, and he's a total success story. I see these trucks around town with his name on it from the company that he used to own, and so, yeah, there are these success stories, and his story is a double success stories because, he dealt with, a bunch of issues in that same area, injury, addiction. He had legal issues, and, yeah, he still climbed the mountain and came out on top.
Wow. Yeah. Great success story.
Yeah, and but yeah, I'd love to interview him and other people, and that's a danger is, there was this one messenger who was crazy fast, and there's a twist to the story where he dated his best friend's sister and they had a kid together, but then, just like a lot of couples, they broke up and they shared the child, and then he took off with the kid.
Wow.
I'd love to put the names of that, but I want someone to tell a story. I'd love someone more closer to the story to tell that story.
Yeah.
It's there was one messenger. I'll tell his story because I think it's a fun one, but not fun. And he's passed away. He died of a bile duct cancer, the same cancer my ex-wife died for. But there was a bike messenger in the mid 80s, Kevin Haley, and he played music. He was in bands, long hair, and he was actually in a band with Stevie Gibson, called Staple Gun, and
nice.
And he was in a bunch of bands, and he was just a wonderful guy. He was a great guy, and he dated a female messenger named Amanda, and Amanda had a kid, and I can remember Amanda, in the park breastfeeding her kid, like 2 Pond Circle, and so they dated, but it wasn't his kid. And so he's this long-haired guitar player, and it's sort of, it's the mid-'80s, and, it's sort of like on the way to Guns N' Roses type moment. And he goes out to LA to like make it as a, guitar player. And he's going to go out there. Well, no, let me back. That's right. He's going to go out to LA. And his girlfriend goes out first to blaze the trail. And before he can get out there, it's like he finds out that his girlfriend, who had started dancing in a bar to pay the bills, was in a relationship with Kiefer Sutherland.
Oh, wow.
And so when he found that out, he didn't know what to do. And so he sold the story to the tabloids for $500. And Kiefer Sutherland was engaged to Julia Roberts in that moment. So that woman, Amanda, who was a sweet woman, and I'm not sex shaming anyone for being a dancer,
Right.
It's more just a story of relationships and a bike messenger and his little tale of woe. His tale of woe, his tragedy is that he died of cancer. I mean, he ended up marrying a wonderful woman and having kids by, etc., so on and so forth, and lived in Brooklyn. Like, his life didn't stop in that moment, And if that hadn't happened, what path would his life taken? He took a different path. But the cancer is a tragedy of that story, and it's just kind of like an amusing story.
Yeah. Pretty cool. Kiefer Sutherland, huh?
Yeah, there you go. That's an ADC Bike Messengers, 6 degrees of separation with Hollywood.
Right. That's crazy.
But motors back in that same era, and actually a peer of Kevin Haley's was, there were these motorcycle messengers, and a lot of people, I say, like, a lot of bike people and people who are fascinated about bike messengers don't realize that it was cars, trucks, mopeds, motorcycles, and bicycles. Yeah, and so there were these motorcycle messengers, and guitar player Brian Baker was a motorcycle messenger, Archer Courier, along with Graham McCulloch, and they actually played with that guy Tesco V, who released a record, War of the Superbikes, which is an amazing rock and roll record. I don't know what kind of music you listen to, but pull it up on Spotify, and it's a weird mix of real rock and roll with subtle comedy.
That's cool. I'm a rock guy, so I grew up playing rock, playing guitar since I've been 15. So still playing a band now called Screaming Monkeys. So we play all over the place. So it's fun. We do everything from the classics, I say, like from Boston to Bruno Mars, but we're playing all the 80s, favorite stuff, the Journey, Bon Jovi and that, but then we'll do like Alice in Chains and Tool and play some heavy stuff, and then throw in some Lady Gaga. So we're all over the map, but it's cool when it works, and high level caliber of musicians, so it's a lot of fun playing with these guys.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, it's always an insecurity of mine that I never became a musician, and so that's got to be a joy. Yeah, it's I just sometimes I look at musicians and I can cover one thing, but originals, like if you're an original band and someone sees, like, people are having life-changing moments like at your show. Mm-hmm. It's like someone might meet their wife or first kiss, or I saw this one local band that you might know. It's Tom Clifford's band, and he's in a bunch of bands, but I saw King Soul, and it brought out like all these older couples, and they were all on the dance floor dancing, and I thought it was like a scene from Cocoon, and it's something to marvel at, and they're an amazing band, and they put on a great show, and the guy can belt out a tune, but he'll pull out the harmonica or the accordion, and so. Yeah, I get it. That's awesome that you're still jamming, you're still getting out there, and it's a great thing to share with your friends. It is.
It's great for networking, because I do a lot of networking for the business now, and so it's neat to invite clients out, and all my worlds have collided, from my jet ski buddies to my music buddies to my business buddies, my church buddies, and you all get together, and it feels like when you're at a wedding, and you have all those different groups of people from your life, from your college, that are now blending together. And it's neat because then you find these crazy relationships that like, those two people know each other. How in the world do you two know each other, right? So, but it's really neat, and it's a great opportunity to network also because it's a differentiator. So when I'm out trying to find clients for our courier business or even for the moving business, I stand out because they're like, oh, I see you on LinkedIn. You're the guy that plays the music. Or you're the guy that's always out, snowboarding or jet skiing or doing fun stuff like that. And so, and we're always looking for those differentiators, right, to where we stand out, to where, when I was networking and I was just doing the courier work, it was easy because I was the only courier company in the room. I could be there with 600 people in that room, and there was no other courier company ever showed up to network. A lot different in the moving world. I would go to an event now and there's 6 other moving companies right there beside me. So you gotta stand out somehow.
Yeah, and we were speaking about the messengers and in the 2000s, and Scrooge had been a bike messenger for years, and he was one of the first adapters of the cargo bike, and it's so even on the lower level, and I think that. Yeah, standing out. It's where the success comes, and
But he could deliver the boxes. You got 3 boxes. He's like, I can take them.
Well, and that's the thing is that I said I had various theme books. One of my books is Messengers Carrying More Than an Envelope, and there's a few guys out there, and it amuses me that there's a number of guys that don't use a rack. They like to ride a road bike and have a backpack, and I just love to get stuff off my back. And now I went to the Philly Bike Expo this weekend, and there's just more options than there used to be.
Yeah, I like when I'm traveling now. You go into Europe or you go into Asia or something like that, and you see these bicycles that are just stacked with like 12 boxes on them, and they're riding down the road, and you're like, how do you even get those things on there and get started riding? And they just use the bikes or the motorcycles for everything, and it's just amazing how much they can put on 2 wheels in other countries.
Yeah, a lot of times you'll go to these countries, it could be Peru or, the third world is a third world, or Hong Kong, and it's funny that they'll use the bicycle, and the chain could be broken from it, but they use the bicycle just as a vehicle for walking and moving massive amounts.
Yeah, it's more of a cargo bearing vehicle than you would imagine in other cultures.
Yeah, well, I think we should close it out because I don't know how much more people want to listen to, but I look forward to maybe meeting you one time in person. It'd be great to catch up. And you should probably check out the podcast because I cover a bunch of different stories, and I think some of those names, I think you might get a kick out of it.
I would love it. Thank you so much, Joel, for having me on.
And if you can dredge up any more photos, send them to me in the next 24 hours, and I'll include them. I'll play a slideshow with that people can watch while we talk when I play it on YouTube.
Great. I sent you that one of Kingfish, that ring I had made for him and gave it to him. I think it was his, I don't know, maybe 30th or 40th year or something like that. He was a 5-decade courier. So he started in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, right? So he worked in 5 different decades. But I gave that to him as one of his anniversaries, that ring that we had made for him with the Metro logo on it. So that's what that ring is.
So did he work for Metro in 67?
So I think he said he was there in the 60s or maybe the 70s, but he called himself the 5-decade courier because he spanned over 5 different decades when he worked there at Metro. So I don't know whether it was 60s through 2000, maybe it was the 70s through, I'm not even sure what year it was he retired, but I remember him always referring to himself as the 5-decade courier.
Yeah, and so he's another father-son. He had a son who in DC was, a cyclist, and I don't know how much delivery worked. He may have done more of the weed sale, but in DuPont, messenger adjacent. He was a good kid. I still see him around.
That's cool. Well, give him my regards. Kingfish and I, we had a very close relationship, so he was truly a dear friend.
I love to hear that. And, Jeff, so what we could do is, maybe another time, if you jot down memories or things, because, once you tell the story, you just need a sentence to get you started. And the stories of Kingfish, so this is part of the oral history project, is to capture the stories before they can't be told. And Kingfish, a man of a million stories, is not here to tell stories. So even like for you to tell this last couple sentences about Kingfish, it legitimizes some of his claims. Mm-hmm. And so, recently, Messenger last fall, Batman died, and he just seemed like a wild dude. And I wish that I had the time to sit down with him. I need to step on it. Oral history. I need to. I think that it was cool that I widened my net and I reached out and found you, because I think, like I said, I think you told some great stories, and I think people are going to be intrigued by it.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you're doing to kind of capture the genealogy of the bike messenger industry, and those characters and legends that have left this legacy here for us.
And Scrooge is somebody I want to interview, but I think that Scrooge is doing was doing an oral history project, but I don't know, because I know Scrooge, a hello and a nod, but we're not like, we're not like, I'm not in close contact with him. But yeah, I should just reach out to him, But he's a gatekeeper of sorts, and we'll see how much. So when I did the photo thing, he was hesitant, and then he agreed that I could take his photo. On the first approach, he was like no, and then later he gave in. I had to maybe earn his respect.
Right. Very cool. Well, I'll see if I can drum up some more pictures for you and shoot those over to you. Awesome.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Have a good night.
Joel, thank you so much for having me. You take care.
All right. Later. Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're still with us. That was Jeff Wingrove, and I hope I'm not saying his name incorrectly. And Jeff Wingrove of Metro Delivery, messenger delivery company that has expanded its services, but it's been a company since 1967, and that's a lot of messenger history, and Jeff shared a good deal of that. But that's the end of episode 24, or whatever. I don't know what number episode it will be, but if you find it that you want to support the Gwadzilla Podcast, you can do so by buying one of my books on Blurb.com. And all you have to do is Google Blurb, Gwadzilla, and it will give you my profile page. I've got 5 massive books that are cost prohibitive, but I have about 20 small books that are $25 a piece, as mentioned, various themes, and that would be a great way to show some support and get a piece of the DC Bike Messenger history in your book collection. All right. Thank you, and have a good night.